This hearing will come to order. As this hearing is fully virtual, we must address a few housekeeping matters. For today's meeting, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for the purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I notice that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. If there is a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. You will notice a clock on your screen that will show how much time is remaining. At 1 minute remaining, the clock will turn yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind members that their time is almost expired. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red, and I will begin to recognize the next member. In terms of the speaking order, we will begin with the chair and ranking member. Then members present at a time the hearing is called to order will be recognized, in order of their seniority. And finally, members not present at the time the hearing is called to order. Finally, House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. And with that, I want to acknowledge Ranking Member Cole and all of our colleagues for joining this morning, and I want to thank our witnesses for testifying. Good morning to Dr. Collins. Welcome back to the Labor HHS Education Appropriations Subcommittee. I would also like to welcome the 5 Institute directors joining Dr. Collins today. Dr. Diana Bianchi, Director of the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. Dr. Anthony Fauci, Director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Dr. Gary Gibbons, Director of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. Dr. Ned Sharpless, Director of the National Cancer Institute, and Dr. Nora Volko, Director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. I want to note that I intend to invite an additional panel of Institute and Center directors to testify in front of the subcommittee later this year. We were not able to hold a second panel last year due to the pandemic, but I want to make sure the subcommittee hears from every institute about its promising research. The last time Dr. Collins and the IC directors were here to testify on the National Institutes of Health budget was March 4th, 2020. There were 128 newly reported COVID cases that day in the United States, which more than doubled the total number of cases that had been identified to date. Later that day, the House would pass the first COVID supplemental bill, which included over $800 million to support NIH on basic research, diagnostics, treatments, and vaccines for COVID-19. Today, over 14 months later, the Congress has provided over $4.8 billion to support NIH research related to COVID. Based in part on these investments and the partnerships with other agencies and the private sector, 3 COVID-19 vaccines were developed in record time and are now widely available in the United States. And nearly 300 million vaccine doses have been administered, including nearly 4 million in my home state of Connecticut. In my view, this is a remarkable achievement, made possible not only by targeted investments in COVID research, but also by the annual sustained investments in biomedical research made by this committee in recent years. In the 20 years before the COVID-19 pandemic, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID, invested over $650 million in basic research on coronavirus, and in particular on the spike protein that is the target of coronavirus vaccines. This crucial breakthrough allowed researchers at the NIAID Vaccine Research Center to rapidly generate a stabilized spike protein for use in the developing the COVID-19 vaccines in use today. In addition, NIH has also made substantial investments into mRNA technology and its potential use in vaccines and therapeutics, which was essential to the rapid development of COVID vaccines. I call your attention to an article that was November of 2020, and I'll just give you the title. Government-funded scientists laid the groundwork for billion-dollar vaccines. And I mentioned this because I think it's critical in what this committee is able to accomplish, and also what our scientists at the NIH, with the funds, federal funds, are able to accomplish. Quite frankly, it is such a relief to millions of Americans to finally have access to the COVID vaccine. In Connecticut, a couple of weeks ago, we had a FEMA mobile vaccination clinic open on the New Haven Green. A family with 2 teenagers was there to get their vaccines. Their father, Roberto, said that he wanted his daughter, Sophia, and his son, Diego, to get vaccinated as soon as possible to avoid the risk of their contracting COVID and spreading it to the youngest of their younger sisters, who was only 4 years old. After receiving her shot, Sophia, who was 16, said, and I quote, "Now I am vaccinated, it means I won't be afraid to get COVID-19 as much as I was before," end quote. Can you imagine being a 16-year-old and fearing for your life and the health of your family? Thanks to the vaccine, Sophia and her brother can finally stop living in fear and get back to being normal teenagers. This is just one of the many stories of how the COVID vaccine has made such an immeasurable difference in our lives. None of it would have been possible without the increased funding that Congress has consistently provided for the NIH. And I am proud that we have increased NIH funding by $12.9 billion, 42% over the past 6 years. And this support has been bipartisan from this subcommittee. Last year, the Congress provided an additional $1.25 billion increase over the fiscal year 2020 level for the NIH. I am pleased to see that President Biden's budget requests to continue the momentum in fiscal year 2022. The request proposes an increase of about $2.5 billion to expand funding for NIH's core activities, such as research grants, clinical trials, and infrastructure support. The request also proposes to establish a new Advanced Projects Research Agency for Health, or ARPA-H, to accelerate the development of treatments and cures. I'm especially glad to see that the budget proposes increased investments in research on maternal health to address the crisis of maternal mortality in the U.S. Maternal mortality is such a major problem and an issue that I have been working on for quite some time, as have so many of my colleagues. I also look forward to further details about how the budget proposal will support research on how to reduce racial and ethnic disparities in maternal health outcomes and improve maternal mental health. In that vein, I am grateful that this budget proposes increased funding for research into other health and mental health disparities that are disproportionately affecting underrepresented communities. As I have often said, these issues have been further exposed and exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And as Dr. Collins says so eloquently in his written testimony is, and I quote, forcing a recognition that our country is still suffering the consequences of centuries of racism. I was also glad to see that the budget doubles funding for research on gun violence prevention at the NIH, building off the investments this subcommittee has made over the past 2 years. I am interested in getting a progress report on the funded projects and any potential evaluation that you may have. I know it may be too early, but I hope you can let us know a little more about the status of this program. I might add that I am intrigued by the proposal to establish ARPA-H as it appears to be a novel approach to supporting innovation to address problems in health and medical research. I look forward to learning more about this proposal, and I want to emphasize that it is critical that we strike a balance between this new approach and investments in basic research and fundamental discovery at NIH. As I noted earlier, the Congress and this subcommittee has consistently provided funding for basic research at NIH that was integral in setting the stage for the rapid development of COVID-19 vaccines. As we move forward, I think it will be important to balance the promise of this new approach with a continued commitment to basic research. One of my priorities on the labor HHS bill has been to ensure a strong across-the-board increase for NIH research so that we continue to invest in all areas of research instead of limiting new investments to a few of the most high-profile diseases. I am disappointed that research on amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, has not been mentioned as a potential area of focus for ARPA-H, and hope to learn more about how NIH proposes to make decisions about how best to target ARPA-H funding. I'm also curious to hear more about how ARPA-H would differ from existing NIH centers and programs that support high-risk, high-reward research, such as the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, NCATS. I realize that because the administration's full budget has not yet been released, Dr. Collins, you cannot provide all of the details on the NIH request today. But I believe we can have a good discussion on the priorities that have been announced, and we look forward to receiving the full NIH request in a few days. Now let me turn to my friend from Oklahoma, the ranking member, Congressman Cole, for any opening remarks that he may have.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I could probably just say amen and dispense with my remarks because there's essentially nothing in your opening statement that I don't agree with wholeheartedly. I've enjoyed all the hearings held by the subcommittee this year, and that's a compliment to you, Madam Chair. I think we've had a succession of really terrific hearings on a variety of topics. But I must admit, welcoming the scientific leaders from the National Institute of Health is the hearing I most look forward to every year. I'm pleased to once again welcome Director Francis Collins, as I often say, clearly the best politician in Washington, D.C., having been appointed by Presidents Obama, President Trump, and now President Biden. I'd challenge anybody to match that record, but I think it is a clear indication of how much regard the director is held in, and frankly, the NIH itself. Each year brings new and exciting innovations in medicine and treatment and a glimpse into the world and the possibilities of our future. I'm always encouraged when we learn about these scientific advancements. And I know I've said this numerous times, but it bears repeating. Increasing funding for the NIH is one of the best bipartisan accomplishments of this subcommittee, Madam Chair, as you noted in your opening statement. Let me break from my prepared statement to make a point that I think is important to make here. I've made the point repeatedly in previous hearings that I think the administration's budget is pretty heavy on domestic spending. It goes up 18%, pretty light on defense spending, which is flat and actually has an inflation-adjusted cut. And I've said that that needs to change, that the defense number needs to come up and the domestic number, in my opinion, needs to come down, or we run the risk of a CR. Having said that, I want to make it crystal clear. I support the president's top line budget number for the NIH. And I'd throw in the CDC and the strategic stockpile as well. I think those are areas of critical national investment that we can all work together on and see the benefit of. And I say that just to make it clear to my friends, while I haven't changed my view on the overall budget in this area, I doubt there's much daylight between the chairman and me as to the importance of this investment for our future. I think we've demonstrated that together over the last 6 years. I'm comfortable and confident we'll demonstrate that again going forward. A sustained commitment to increasing funding for the NIH is a vital step in preserving our status as the world's leader in biomedical research and defining novel treatments and cures for the many diseases burdening our strained healthcare system. The funding also does far more. Several studies have shown funding for the NIH has a multiplier effect, contributing to overall U.S. economic growth. The investments made at NIH over the past few years and even further back over the past decades, as our chair pointed out, laid a groundwork for our response to the COVID pandemic. The National Cancer Institute stepped in with advanced lab capacity. The National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases led the way with expertise related to infectious disease. The Office of the Director supported efforts to make rapid advancements in therapeutics and diagnostics. And of course, last but certainly not least, with NIH support, Operation Warp Speed provided enough doses of vaccine for every adult in America. The NIH is a shining example of what can be achieved when we put our best minds together and work to accomplish bold and challenging goals. Much attention in the past year has gone to COVID and the associated scientific discoveries, and rightly so. But I hope in the coming years we can also continue our conversations and scientific advancements in Alzheimer's disease and cancer treatment. These two areas have seen strong congressional interest and represent a foundational shift in how we treat diseases responsible for the loss of most Americans each year. I also hope that the promises of precision medicine can be experienced by more patients, and believe that All of Us program can improve how we use genetic information in routine medical care. Dr. Collins, you've once again brought an excellent team representing some of the largest institutes and most promising frontiers of new discoveries. I look forward to hearing from all of you. I also want to recognize that the NIH is composed of 27 institutes and centers, most of whom are not able to be with us today. Even though we are not able to have each director come before us, our offices continuously hear about the groundbreaking work and collaborative partnerships at all the NIH components. We know that work is done across the NIH and that each institute or center is a contributor. In closing, I want to stress each dollar invested in the NIH is a down payment on our future. This work has in the past and will in the future continue to improve the course of disease detection, treatment, and even cures in the years and generations to come. I know congressional commitment to advancing these shared objectives has been unwavering. And I want to thank you, Madam Chair, for holding the hearing, and frankly, more importantly, thank you for your long record of support for the NIH and dealing with the issues of disease. It's been an area where you've led throughout your career, and you continue to lead today, and you certainly have all of our support on this committee in that effort. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you for that, your comments, but again, most importantly, the friendship, but working together on this issue, which is so critically important. And it's been a really a team effort, and I'm most appreciative of that. Before I turn to Dr. Collins, I want to ask unanimous consent to put into the record the article I referenced: government-funded scientists laid the groundwork for billion-dollar vaccines. Dr. Collins, your full testimony will be included in the record. You are now recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chair DeLauro, Ranking Member Cole, and distinguished members of this subcommittee. I'm honored to be here today with my colleagues representing the National Institutes of Health, the NIH. I could spend hours describing the exciting work that the President's budget is proposing for NIH, including major investments to address impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, reduce health disparities and maternal mortality and morbidity, improve mental health, broaden approaches to pain and opioid addiction, and establish a bold new agency within NIH called ARPA-H. But in our brief time together, it's also important to emphasize how the steady funding increases that you have provided to NIH starting well before the pandemic made it possible for NIH to meet the challenges of the pandemic and to prepare for what comes next. You know, often at these hearings, I share the story of a patient whose life has been saved by NIH research. But in this uniquely challenging year, it's hard to single out any one person. In fact, all of the more than 160 million Americans who have received COVID-19 vaccines are success stories, made possible by the sustained investment that this committee made years ago to basic biomedical research. The road to these mRNA vaccines that Pfizer and Moderna now are distributing around this country and around the world actually started in the 1960s, when the function of messenger RNA was first understood. These messengers carry instructions from the cell's DNA manual to produce the proteins that do the work. For vaccines, we knew that certain proteins, like the spike proteins on this coronavirus, could spur an immune response. But might it be safer and just as effective to use RNA to instruct the patient's own body to produce these proteins? Though it took surmounting numerous obstacles to get there, we are blown away by how well it works. In parallel, other scientists, including some at our Vaccine Research Center, learned that locking that spike protein into the right configuration could make an even better vaccine. So when COVID hit, we knew exactly what to do. As the seriousness of the pandemic became clear, research institutions and drug companies started off in multiple directions, competing over trial capacity, duplicating efforts, and flooding the FDA with disparate data. NIH was prepared to step in with a coordinated playbook. Working with other agencies and industry partners, we stood up something called ACTIV, A-C-T-I-V, the Accelerating COVID-19 Therapeutic Interventions and Vaccines Partnership. And we stood it up in just 2 weeks. ACTIV's teams of public and private sector visionaries implemented objective prioritization of therapeutic candidates, knitted together clinical trial networks, and wrote master protocols to streamline approvals. Another vital partnership NIH was able to build on was one we have with underserved communities. As we push to enroll patients in phase 3 vaccine trials, NIH opened a dialogue with communities disproportionately affected by COVID. The Community Engagement Alliance, or SEAL initiative, built on existing long-term partnerships with trusted leaders in underserved communities to encourage trial participation. We were able to use the enrollment techniques we learned in large longitudinal studies such as All of Us that you have championed. The result is that all Americans can look at the major vaccine trials and see that people like them were included. And SEAL has now moved on to help with vaccine hesitancy in these same communities. Now the president's budget proposes a major investment to build on this momentum, the Advanced Research Project Agency for Health, or ARPA-H. This new agency within NIH will catalyze novel strategies to speed transformational and innovative ideas. Ideas like simple blood tests to detect free-floating DNA or protein markers that signal a cancer is growing somewhere in the body. Maybe a microneedle patch that delivers a vaccine to hard-to-reach communities in the mail. Or using an innovation funnel to recruit, test, and scale up new technologies for ambulatory blood pressure measurement with the potential to transform the management of hypertension. Those are just 3 of the bold ideas that ARPA-H could tackle, but they're not science fiction. With standard approaches, they might happen in a decade or 2. With ARPA-H, it could take half that time. The president believes that with your help, we can learn from the lessons of the pandemic and transfer this scientific momentum into big improvements in the health of all Americans. I do too. My colleagues and I would be pleased to answer your question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Collins. I just want to say I sometimes make reference to this panel when you come up, and I use my, the Yankee baseball team of talking about the power and the hitting power of Murderers Row. But today I want to just talk about Healers Row and really extraordinary work that has translated to the benefit of so many and have already saved so many lives. So thank you for the work that you do. I want to, I know that you can't share so many details about the structure of ARPA-H. That will be, I understand, in the president's budget. You just started to talk about some of the things. I have kind of three questions in this area. Again, share some examples, the kinds of research that this might support, and how it differs from the types of research typically supported by the NIH. How is ARPA-H different than NCATS, which was established a decade ago, and that was about promising medical research into treatments and cures that are available, and how is this approach different? And then I just wanted to ask about how ALS research could benefit from the high risk, high reward accelerated approach proposed by ARPA-H.
Well, thank you. That's a wonderful set of questions. And I want to tell you that my colleagues and I are really excited about the potential that ARPA-H offers for us to move biomedical research even more nimbly and aggressively forward to make the kinds of discoveries that the public is waiting for. We learned a lot in the space of our experience with COVID-19 about how it is possible when there is an urgent sense of the need for clinical advances to happen at unprecedented speed. And that happened with vaccines, that happened with diagnostics, that happened with setting up therapeutic trials. And from that, we have gathered the general sense that this momentum ought not to be lost. And talking with all of the 27 institutes and centers, the notion of taking the DARPA approach to biomedical research has gathered a lot of enthusiasm. DARPA, as you know, as part of DoD, has had that experience of moving things in a very bold and risk-taking way. And that's why we ended up with the internet and with GPS and with self-driving cars and a long list of other things. And we think there is a subset of biomedical research that would also be amenable to this kind of approach. This would involve program managers who are given the flexibility to identify in an area of opportunity ways that you could bring together partners who might not normally write an NIH grant. Those might be academics, they might be small businesses, and figure out how to create the kind of momentum with appropriate financial support to move things forward at unprecedented speed. You could think, for instance, taking what we've learned about messenger RNA for COVID-19 and speeding up the process of cancer vaccines, which are showing a lot of promise but could go faster. What about something such as a new approach to hearing aid development, which has been a little stuck in one place and might greatly be advanced by this kind of innovation funnel or Shark Tank? Such things as using the technologies we now have to learn zip codes of all of the human cell types so that you could deliver drugs or gene therapies in an appropriate and rapid fashion. Those are all ideas that are coming out. Every one of the 27 institutes and centers is hitting me with lots of great ideas.
So tell me how this differs from NCATS.
So I'm very much proud of NCATS, having had a lot to do with nurturing that idea of coming up with something that would provide translational efforts. And they have in things like tissue chips, in terms of making high throughput screening available, but it's on a modest scale. Most of NCATS is supporting the CTSAs, a very important part of our clinical research effort. This basically takes the NCATS model and puts it on steroids, takes the kinds of things that have been in the Cure Acceleration Network and makes it possible to do so at a much more rapid pace and across all diseases in a way that all the institutes at NIH can join in on and very much want to. So yeah, I think it is building on that experience, but taking it to the next level.
I understand that, but just let me ask you this, then what happens with NCATS? If we're going to build on that, do we then fold in this? Do we then have one area that we're looking at here rather than two, ARPA-H and NCATS, and then we just create one effort?
It's a very good question, Madam Chair, and I don't think we have a completely clear best option at the present time. It might be possible, for instance, for the CTSAs to move into ARPA-H or potentially to stay where they are with NCATS. We might take the Cures Acceleration Network model and move that into ARPA-H. Those all are issues that need to be worked out. We need a lot more input now that we can talk more publicly about this, or we can in a couple of days, to get input from stakeholders.
It would appear to me that when they talked about Alzheimer's, diabetes, and cancer with regard to ARPA-H, I don't know where ALS fits in that, and was that left out for some reason? And it's a devastating neurological disease, as you know.
Yes.
And there are no current effective treatments to stop or even slow the progression, as I understand it. And you know, I'm not a scientist, so.
So if I may, I know the clock's run out, but just very quickly, cancer, Alzheimer's, and diabetes were put forward as examples of common diseases that ARPA-H could work on, but the intention is for this model to be applied to all of the diseases that are ready for this scientifically. And I think ALS is a great example. Already had conversations with the Neurology Institute about an ARPA-H project specifically focused on ALS, recognizing that we are learning some fundamental things about what happens to the motor neurons in the spinal cord that could, with a crash program, be advanced much more quickly to understand the pathogenesis and ultimately new approaches to therapy using such things as RNA approaches. So I think it's a great example, Madam Chair, of what we could do that we currently can't quite do with this new mechanism.
Thank you, and I will have questions for Dr. Fauci and Dr. Gibbons, but with that, let me yield to the distinguished ranking member of the committee, Congressman Cole.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I want to build on your line of questioning because as I said in my opening remarks, look, I'm very supportive of the president's top line proposal here. As a matter of fact, I'm pleased to have a president who set out a marker. With all due respect, the last two, this committee went well beyond what was proposed here. And so it's nice to have a partner at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue who sees this, the value of this investment, I think, the same way the chairman and I do. Having said that, I'm wondering, I look at a $6 billion plus investment in ARPA-H, and as you said, Dr. Collins, we still have unresolved questions and procedures. Would it be better to start with a more modest investment? DARPA itself is about 3.8 billion, and plow the rest of that money into our normal research. Again, I'm not arguing for a reduction in total spending. I'm just arguing for we're going a little fast here before we actually have this thing worked through. So I'd love your thoughts on that, with the recognition that you work for the President of the United States, so your job is to defend his proposal. But
thank you for pointing that out.
Maybe a little bit more aggressive here, although I like the instinct that he's showing.
Well, thank you, Congressman Cole, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness in this regard in terms of what's the right balance here. Let me point out, though, that ARPA-H is not intended to be a freestanding entity that's sort of over here somewhere, and then you have the 27 institutes and centers over there doing something different. This is an engine for discovery that is going to be tapped into by every one of those 27 institutes and centers, extending their reach beyond what they could do with their current budget line. So we shouldn't think of these as competitive, but rather as synergistic. Yeah, it is a big deal to start something up with a $6.5 billion budget. Fortunately, this has been put forward by the president as 3-year money, which would help a lot as we're sort of ramping this up. But I believe, based upon the experience we've had with COVID-19, and again, thank you, Congress, for providing us during this crisis with, as the Chairman DeLauro said a little bit ago, over $4 billion of additional funds to help. We had no difficulty figuring out how to invest those in vaccines, in therapeutics, and in diagnostics. And I believe if funds are available, there are enough ideas and enough science and enough scientists out there to do the work that we could very well utilize what's been proposed by the president.
Well, good. Well, I look forward to working with you on that. I still have some concerns, but we can resolve those in dialogue because we don't have any differences on the top line here. Let me turn to Dr. Sharpless, if I may. And one of the more both impressive and challenging problems we've had is there's been so many wonderful proposals in the area of cancer research in recent years. And while we've steadily pushed up the number of money at NIH, it seems to me we've had a hard time funding all the good proposals in front of us in terms of cancer. It seems to be a lower percentage of grants funded than in most of the other areas. So could you sort of bring us up to date where we are in funding good science and give us your thoughts as to what else we ought to be doing to make sure that we're not leaving good ideas on the table in terms of cancer research?
Yeah, thank you, Representative Cole. It's a really important topic, and I think the good news to start off with is that thanks to the support of this appropriations subcommittee, we have had the ability to increase our pay lines and success rates, these metrics we follow, which had gone down to very low levels because of the dramatic increase in applications to the National Cancer Institute. So applications were up 47% since 2013, and that's hard to keep up with. So I think our pay lines, one metric we follow, nadir'd at 8% and are now up to 11%. So that is a 35% increase in the last 2 years, which I think is good progress. But that's still a pretty low support rate. I think we would like to get to a number that would be more like 15th percentile, which would match sort of the rest of the NIH a little more closely. As you know, there are a lot of important things we support outside of that pool that we have to fund as well. So I think that this is a good problem in some ways. It says there are a lot of scientists coming to the NCI with ideas that are very, very valuable, and we need to be able to get to them all. And the support of this subcommittee has been very important in the past, but I think that's still an area where our pay lines are still too low.
Well, we don't have a lot of time left, and so I'm not going to use all mine, but I want to say I'm glad you're back at the NCI after your stint at the FDA. I know you did a great job there, but we really like you where you're at and appreciate the job that you've done. I got a lot of questions like you do, Madam Chair, but I will hold them for the next round, and I yield back.
I thank the chair, and I appreciate that question to Dr. Sharpless. It is a question that I had as well, so thank you very, very much. I say that to the ranking member. Now, Congresswoman Roybal-Allard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me begin, Dr. Collins, first of all, by joining my colleagues in thanking you for the incredible work that you do. However, I would like to address my questions with regards to the ECHO program. It has been 6 years since the congressionally directed National Children's Study was prematurely canceled despite an investment of approximately $1.5 billion over its 14 years of planning and implementation. At the time of its termination, without informing Congress, this subcommittee was guaranteed that the newly developed environmental influence on child health outcomes program would make use of the existing maternal pediatric cohorts that were recruited to the National Children's Study. We were further reassured that the ECHO program would attempt to answer many of the original study's critical research about the environmental influence of a child's development and health. We are now 6 years into what was designed to be a 7-year program, and it is my understanding that over 57,000 children are being followed in longitudinal cohorts to study factors affecting child health in the areas of pregnancy and birth, respiratory integrity, obesity, neurodevelopment, and well-being. Which of the original NCS study questions are being addressed through the ECHO program? And can you give us some examples of the research that is being done utilizing these cohorts?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman, for the question. I'm going to turn to Dr. Diana Bianchi, Director of National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, who's been quite engaged as one of the advisors for the ECHO program, which is managed by Dr. Matthew Gilman. Dr. Bianchi?
Thank you, Dr. Collins and Representative Roybal-Allard. As you know, the ECHO program brings together 72 different cohorts, and they're currently doing observational studies on over 50,000 children. One of the most impactful studies that has recently been completed has looked at women entering pregnancy and looking at the connection between a healthy weight in the mother or the pregnant woman and eating a healthy diet during pregnancy. And that has resulted in a statistically significant decrease in the rate of preterm birth. And interestingly, it was significant in both Black and white women because Black women do have a higher incidence of preterm birth. So that is quite impactful. In addition, NICHD is working with the ECHO program on an interventional study using the Idea States Pediatric Clinical Trials Network, which is part of the ECHO program. And we are working together to provide comparative effectiveness studies to determine how best to treat neonatal opioid withdrawal syndrome. So these include a pharmacology-free intervention, which is eat, sleep, and console the babies, as well as a weaning trial. And we have trials planned for the future to look at buprenorphine in infants.
Okay, I have several questions regarding this program, but I'll just go to my last question because time's running short. Is the NIH considering extending the ECHO program, given that the original NCS study was designed to follow children from birth through age 21, and the cohorts, as I understand, have not yet reached the age of 21?
Dr. Collins, do you want to answer that since the program is in the Office of the Director?
Sure. No, I think that's a very important question. And we do want to fully realize the potential of this very important cohort of over 50,000 kids. And obviously the time is about right in the course of the next year to figure out exactly what that future course will be. We have engaged internally in some deeper discussions about that and would like to get back to you, Congresswoman, about possible paths that we might take this forward. But I do want to endorse how critical we see the ECHO program is for answering all those questions that you and we are quite concerned about.
Okay, well, I hope it will continue because, as you know, the purpose was to evaluate the effects of chronic and intermittent exposures on child health and human development in the United States. And it would actually be the first study to collect this broad range of environmental exposure measures for a national probability sample of 100,000 children followed from birth or before birth at age 21. And this is extremely important for communities such as the one that I represent, because it looks at the disparities of children in rural and underserved communities, which often have greater health issues and problems. So I'm hoping that you'll find a way to continue this program because, as you said, is extremely important. I yield back the balance of my time.
Congressman Harris.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for being here again this year. One of the things that we have to do is, though, provide some oversight of the monies that have been appropriated to NIH. And for instance, this morning's front page story in the Wall Street Journal is the Wuhan lab leak debate. So this continues to be discussed. And I just would like, Dr. Collins, maybe just a couple of clarifications. I understand we did not directly fund the Wuhan Institute of Virology, but my understanding is we did send about $3.7 million in grants to EcoHealth Alliance, of which $600,000 went to the Wuhan Institute of Virology to various studies there. Is that true?
That is correct. I'm going to ask Dr.
Okay.
Fauci also.
So, no, I only have 5 minutes. I just need, that's true. Okay, because I read it, that's true. Do we know whether the Wuhan Institute of Virology does gain of function research?
They were not approved by NIH for doing gain of function research. We do not, and that's the official government identification of that term, by the way. We are, of course, not aware of other sources of funds or other activities they might have undertaken outside of what our approved grant allowed.
Okay, so we could have sent money through EcoHealth Alliance. Money could have ended up in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which might be doing gain of function research. And in fact, since they sent a general of the Communist Party army to take over the lab in February 2020, it's not out of the realm of possibility they're doing that. So because I do know that money is somewhat fungible once you send money to institutes, that it bothers me a little bit that we would send money to an institute that might be doing gain of function research, especially China. Do we send any money to any sub-agencies or sub-grantees that could be sending money to Russia?
I don't know the specific answer to that. I think we have in the past, and I don't know whether we currently do or not.
Okay, and we will submit it as a QFR if you could get back to us about that. Now, in Nature.com, a publication occurred in last September about the development of humanized mouse and rat models with full-thickness human skin and autologous immune cells. Dr. Fauci, this was funded out of the NIAID. It involved scalp skin transplants from 18 to 20-week aborted fetuses. And what I want to know is, does the NIH ever follow up on how these specimens are obtained on mid-second trimester aborted fetuses for studies like this?
Well, Dr. Harris, that grant and that study you're referring to was gone through all the appropriate guidelines and oversight. So I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but all of the research that comes out of that was done with the appropriate oversight and guidelines that have to do with fetal tissue research.
Okay, so I'll submit a QFR. Perhaps if you could send me, what the NIH knows about how these tissues were obtained. I don't know, the idea of taking 18 to 20-week humans fetus scalps. Obviously, this would have to result from decapitation because you have to harvest the scalp. Implanting it on the backs of rats, I'm just not sure that's something we should be involved with to any significant level. Now, one issue that has come up is the question of research on the immunology of COVID and the immune response. T cells, I think, are going to be found to be fairly important, and I think most people recognize are pretty important in determining immune response. Would measuring T cells and T cell immunity, especially in people who've had the disease, would that be of interest? And if so, is the NIH urging the FDA to promote the EU emergency use authorization for T cell testing, which is not widely available, but may be very useful in informing us about the immune response? Dr. Collins?
I think, yes, FDA is intensely interested in this. I don't know that we have to particularly urge them. They have approved one T-cell test from Adaptive Technologies, and I know they're interested in looking at others, and I agree with you. This is a very important part of understanding the immune response to COVID.
Dr. Collins, I'll have to inform you that they are not, and they have in fact informed other companies that this is not a priority for FDA, and they are not actively looking at further EUAs. But my time is up. I yield back.
Congresswoman Lee.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member. Thank you to Dr. Collins and all of our directors for your tremendous leadership. And thank you, Dr. Collins, and all of you for really fighting so hard to crush this virus and all of the work that you have done. You said for the last 30 years in just getting us prepared to save lives and to address the coronavirus. So thank you so much. Let me ask you, Dr. Collins, we've talked a little bit about the continued commitment to address disparities of Black men and women in science and medicine. And I'd like for you to share how NIH has incorporated the findings of the recommendations of the National Academies of Sciences Roundtable on Black men and women in science, engineering, and medicine to address really and it's a major alarming underrepresentation of Black men in the medical schools and in the medical profession. That's the first question. I'm gonna do a couple of questions at one time. Also, just in terms of health disparities, Dr. Collins, let me ask you what specifically, and I know NIH is committed to this, but specifically to address the health disparities stemming from structural racism and more research and resources into behavioral health, trauma-related, informed mental health care, diversity in clinical trials, diversified workforce, all of the major issues that address African Americans, people of color, within within the health space, the National Institute of Health, as it relates to dismantling structural racism and building systems which include equity and justice.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman Lee. I think those questions, actually, I can fold into a synthesized response because we at NIH are deeply invested in taking a very fresh and aggressive look at what we can do about the problem of structural racism in the United States, which we have come to recognize is something that affects all institutions, and that includes the biomedical research institutions that we support. And I have to recognize this is the one-year anniversary of the killing of George Floyd, which I think was a very significant event for many people who had somehow imagined that we were past the point where racism existed in this country. And we at NIH took that and other episodes like that very seriously and have formed together an effort called UNITE, UNITE. There are 5 groups in UNITE, each of which has a specific focus. One is on the workforce, and you specifically have highlighted the problem about the diminishing numbers of Black men going into medicine and medical research, and that is a concern. But frankly, we have a much broader set of concerns. When you look at the diversity of our workforce, it does not look like our country. We have worked hard on that, Congresswoman, and we have made some progress if you look at the numbers of those who are applying for grants and getting funded, but we're still well short of where we need to be. We aim with this UNITE initiative to make a much stronger push in that direction, both in terms of recruiting and retaining, because it's one thing to recruit Black men into medical research. It's another if they find an environment that is not welcoming and then they don't stay. And we have to work on that part as well in terms of our whole culture, our whole environment. And then when it comes to health disparities, we are aware of the fact that health disparities are oftentimes based upon deep-seated structural racism in our environment, in our culture, and it is not sufficient for us to categorize the various factors. We need to invest more in interventions to see how those can be changed. We have announced a common fund program of $24 million. It's already out there to do transformative research on health disparities. And we have a joint funding announcement that now involves a whole bunch of institutes led by the Minority Health and Health Disparities Institute that is putting another $30 million into research in FY22 on this very topic. We will be publishing in the fairly near future a broad description of this UNITE initiative that I think all of the members of this subcommittee will be interested in. I just want to tell you personally of the things that happened in 2020, COVID-19, well, yeah, we'll all remember that. But I think we also have this wake-up call that we have to address this issue of structural racism, and my colleagues and I are determined to do so in a bold, energetic, and determined way.
Thank you so much, Mr. Collins, Dr. Collins, and we'll follow up on the specifics in terms of the budget. Very quickly, Dr. Fauci, good to see you. HIV and AIDS. We know you recently as the, addressing the COVID-19 virus, but you played such an important role in HIV and AIDS early on. How far backwards have we gone now as a result of the COVID virus, and will we achieve an AIDS-free generation?
I don't think we've gone, thank you for that question, Congresswoman Lee. I don't think that we've gone backwards. Obviously, when you shut down a society, the accessibility for testing and for the chain of drug availability can be disrupted the way everything is disrupted in this very terrible time, including vaccinations for children and things like that. However, there have been a number of really important advances that have been under the radar screen with regard to HIV and AIDS. For example, the demonstration that cabotegravir, the long-acting injectable, can be very adequately used for pre-exposure prophylaxis, which I think is going to increase dramatically the adherence to that. And as I've discussed with you in the past, the PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, is an important ingredient in our attempt over the 10 years from 2020 to 2030 to end the epidemic in the United States. And I believe, notwithstanding COVID-19, that we will achieve that goal as trying to implement many of the things that we're doing. So although it appears that things have been under the radar screen, they have in fact been going on, I believe, at a good pace. But thank you for that question.
Thank you, Dr. Fauci. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Congresswoman Herrera Butler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And like everyone else, this is probably my favorite hearing of the year, just getting a chance to talk with really the world-class experts on just about everything. I have a few different questions. The first one, Dr. Collins, I think would be for you. Last year, I requested that NIH develop a comprehensive pediatric research agenda to study the impacts of COVID-19 on children and to report to this committee in 120 days. And I wanted to ask about the status of that report and what are the NIH's maybe preliminary findings and plans for this research agenda.
Well, it was a very appropriate assignment to give us because we know that children have been affected significantly by COVID-19. They can get the illness, they can have this strange and somewhat unusual outcome of MISC, multi-system inflammatory syndrome of children. They also can get long COVID where they don't seem to recover. And we have a big effort on this. Actually, if I may, I'd like to call on Dr. Bianchi, our pediatrician, who can tell you a bit more about what we have been doing.
Great. And I
Sure.
apologize. I have a couple questions I'm going to fit in here. So
Okay, I'll try to be brief, but as you know, almost 4 million
Hard.
children
yeah.
have had positivity for SARS-CoV-2. The critical question is, of those children, most of them are going to be mildly affected, but who's the 1 in 1,000 who is going to get very sick with multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, requiring perhaps an ICU stay and perhaps serious illness and death? To address this through the RADx-RAD program, which is developing radical approaches to testing, we are leading a program, a trans NIH program called Prevail Kids, which comprises 8 different programs that are all taking a different piece of the pie and are looking at children who, for example, come into the emergency room with a fever. Do they have COVID? Are they going to be at risk for MISC? And all of these different programs are taking biospecimens and using bioinformatics to predict who is going to get sick with MISC and then possibly the long COVID. So that
Do we have that preliminary information? Do we have some answers on that?
No, the program has started within the last few months.
Okay.
So-
Okay. I'm interested to be kept abreast of that. Thank you, Dr.
Absolutely.
Bianchi. You know, I read something earlier this week about how 16-year-olds, I think it was with Moderna shot, after 4 days show an enlarged heart. I've seen other things about different kids and how it impacts them. And I cannot stress enough how important I think it is that we turn our attention to the children as it relates to the pandemic. One of the things I do have some challenges with, you know, my 2-year-old just hopped on my lap and she hopped off. You know, the mental health and developmental issues that these kids have been through in the last year. Like, I took my youngest, to Costco. She hadn't been in a big box store. It kind of flipped her out seeing that many people. That's a small thing, right? I think about telling a 2-year-old who maybe is in daycare, you have to wear a mask now all day long, and all the other kids have masks. There's learning and speech developmental issues. There's interaction. So my 2-year-old doesn't speak very much yet. We read a ton to her, but so much of what we do is nonverbal. In fact, most communication is nonverbal anyway. I'm really concerned that now that we've reached this point where you can get a vaccination if you want one, that we're further putting the burden on children to keep the adult population safe by telling young children indoors, outdoors, you're going to mask. While everybody else is now feeling the sense of freedom, we're putting more of the burden on kids who have, I believe, borne the disproportionate share of this, whether it's school and learning loss, mental health, possibly domestic violence, you know, all these different things that we're not going to know we're going to know in the next 10 years. I was hoping someone could speak to that. The mask mandate for children that age at this point, I need to be convinced that that's appropriate.
Thank you for that question and those observations. I think we're all really concerned about this. People sort of shrug and say, well, you know, kids are resilient, but wait a minute, this is really an incredible, unprecedented challenge to their life experience. The National Institute of Mental Health has recently issued that we are asking for grant applications to look specifically at the mental health consequences of COVID-19 for children. What has it meant for them to be out of school, which is normally the place where a lot of socialization and education happens, for this prolonged period? And what about this issue of being fearful of an illness that might actually affect your families, might suddenly be blamed on you if you were the one who happened to bring the illness in? I totally am with you here. There's a lot of unanswered questions. We are going to be studying that, I think, with some considerable intensity, and hope that we can provide some better answers about how best to help.
Can we be updated? Can the committee, I know I'm done with my time, can we be kept abreast?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Congressman Cocan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks to everyone for being here. I completely agree with Representative Ferrera Butler. This is my favorite hearing of the year as well. I have tremendous respect for every single one of the witnesses here, and thank you for all the incredible work you do every single day for all of us. I just wish we could direct more of the Department of Defense funds to the defense that you're doing for this country and the defense that we needed to do so much in the last year around things like COVID-19. I have lots of questions, but I do want to give you a chance, Dr. Collins. I think you were trying to pass a question to Dr. Fauci about the Wuhan lab. I heard lots of things like could, might, and not out of the realm of possibilities, really hard evidence there. I believe there is some white whale narrative changing trying to occur, but if you wanted to have Dr. Fauci answer that briefly, because I do have a lot of questions, I would be glad to give some time up for that.
Dr. Fauci, please.
So what is the question, Congressman Pocan, please? What specific question do you want me to answer?
Well, I believe the question Dr. Harris was asking is, did we fund COVID-19? My bad. I'm paraphrasing it because we got 5 minutes, but that seems to be the new narrative that's out there that somehow let's not worry about vaccinating people and getting the economy going. Let's figure out how to somehow say there's a different way this all started. I'm just kind of curious because I know you've had some interviews on this, but you were asked the question, but not given the opportunity to answer.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Congressman Pocan. Let me first say that I think one of the things that was perhaps was the subtext of Dr. Harris's question is that why do any research in collaboration with our Chinese colleagues? Well, the underlying reason for that is that we had a big scare with SARS-CoV-1 back in 2002, 2003. Where that particular virus unquestionably went from a bat to an intermediate host to start an epidemic and a pandemic that resulted in 8,000 cases and close to 800 deaths. It would have been almost a dereliction of our duty if we didn't study this. And the only way you can study these things is you've got to go where the action is. So I often say, somewhat tongue in cheek, you don't want to study bats in Fairfax County, Virginia, to find out what the animal-human interface is that might lead to a jumping of species. So we had a modest collaboration with very respectable Chinese scientists who are world experts on coronavirus. And we did that through a sub-grant from a larger grant to EcoHealth. The sub-grant was about $600,000 over a period of 5 years. So it was a modest amount. And the purpose of it was to study the animal-human interface, to do surveillance, and to determine if these bat viruses were even capable of transmitting infection to humans. And the question arrived, did you do gain-of-function research? And as Dr. Collins clearly articulated, there was nothing in the grant application and or granting of the purpose of the grant and the description of the grant that would call for what is referred to as gain-of-function. Gain-of-function meaning taking a virus that could infect humans and making it either more transmissible and or pathogenic to humans. That categorically was not done. So that's the answer to that question.
Thank you. So I've got a minute and a half left, and I know there's going to be a second round, but in my minute and a half, I am very concerned about, I think, the more important issues of making sure we get more people vaccinated. Is there anything, initiatives or funding that you might need from this committee to enhance vaccinations? Are you concerned about where we're at? And then a very specific question that I've had, if someone can ask, someone was concerned about spike proteins and the long-term consequences and their potential health effects on cold and flu season. So if you could answer all of those, I'll keep the rest of my subjects for the next round.
I think those are Dr. Fauci again.
I'm sorry, Congressman Pocan, specifically your question?
Specifically, is there, how are we doing on vaccinations? Is there anything else we need to give funding or initiatives to do that? And then very specifically, a question about spike proteins, long-term consequences. I think there was a concern about potential health effects during cold and flu season. It's some of the people who are reluctant right now that I'm talking to, that was an issue on vaccinations.
Yeah, well, we're doing extremely well with vaccinations, as you well know. We have more than 60% of the adult population has been vaccinated. The toxicities, adverse events are remarkably low in this. When you look at the denominator of the literally tens, if not hundreds of millions of vaccine doses that have been given. However, Whenever you get adverse events, even though they're very, very rare, we obviously are interested in whether or not there is anything about the spike protein that would trigger something such as an autoimmune reaction that might give you a deleterious effect. Again, these things are extremely rare. We don't see anything that we can directly relate to the spike protein, but we are certainly looking for that. And there are immunologists who are right now looking to see if there's any connection there. But again, to underscore, Congressman, these are really extraordinarily rare events.
Gotcha. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll get ready for the second round.
Thank you. Congressman Molinar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank everybody for their participation today. Dr. Collins, Dr. Fauci, I first of all want to congratulate you on Operation Warp Speed and the record timing to get this out, to get this working in America. I think it's been a tremendous success. Because of the nature of how quickly the vaccines were developed, I know there is some percentage of the population that has hesitancy, kind of viewing it as somewhat experimental, kind of seeing how it all works out. And especially women of childbearing age who would like to have children in the future. I know there have been some concerns about whether or not the vaccine would in any way affect them in a negative way. I wonder if you could talk to that and just mention if there's any evidence of any risk or concern to women who might be considering that in the future.
I think the evidence is actually quite reassuring, but let me ask Dr. Fauci to give a specific answer to your question.
Yes, thank you very much, Congressman, for that very important question. So if you look at the vaccine trials did not include pregnant women in the trials. There are now trials that are looking at vaccines specifically for effects in pregnant women and in lactating women. Those are ongoing right now. However, if one looks at post-EUA, the number of pregnant women who elected to get vaccinated because of the clear indication that the effect of COVID-19 disease on the pregnant woman and the fetus is really something to be concerned about. So many, many women elected after the EUA to get vaccinated. There have been about 115 to 120,000 of these pregnancies, and there have been about 5,000 to 6,000 of the births that have now been followed by the CDC and by the FDA. And as alluded to by Dr. Collins, there is no red flag signal at all that there's any concern about deleterious effects of the vaccine on pregnant women. This is really important because the one thing we do know for sure is that when pregnant women get infected with COVID-19, they can have a serious deleterious outcome.
Thank you for that. And I think that message is really important to get that out there. And I appreciate hearing that directly from you. I want to talk a little bit about the patent protection. Dr. Collins, maybe you could answer this question. There's been some discussion, and I believe the Biden administration recently announced it will support waiving intellectual property protections for COVID-19 vaccines. I think everyone wants to see these vaccines readily available and the supply, but I'm concerned about waiving the patent rights for these biopharmaceutical companies and how that might impact their willingness and their ability to partner with the federal government in the future when addressing pandemics, because we're taking away significant protections for their investment in research.
So it's a very important question, and it is a complicated issue that no one should just assume can be superficially understood. I think all of us, companies, government, academics, just citizens of the world, believe we need to do everything we can to get vaccinations made available to all the people who need them, and especially so in low and middle income countries where the need is great and the availability in terms of the supply is low. But it should not be assumed that it would be possible just by a quick effort over the course of a couple of months to establish vaccine manufacturing capacity in lots of other parts of the world that don't have it. These are very complicated biochemical processes, biotechnology processes that require, if you're going to start from basically no previous experience, more than just a few months, more like years. And so while this, I think, is in the long term, what we need to see is this expansion of manufacturing capability. In the short term, we're going to depend on the companies that have that capacity to do as much as they can to expand their capabilities. And certainly, I think all of us would agree that's what we need to see happen. So it's going to have to play out over the course of time to see whether this opening up of intellectual property can help with low and middle income countries. But we should not assume that in the short run that this is going to be an immediate solution.
Are you concerned about the long-term impact, though, and the message that sends to, private sector investment and research?
I don't think industry is terribly concerned about that. Stefan Bancel, the CEO of Moderna, said he didn't lose a minute of sleep the night after this announcement was made by the White House. Moderna had already announced they were going to make their intellectual property available to manufacturing capabilities in low-income countries. What's really more necessary than just the IP is the technology transfer capabilities, the skills that have to be transferred, the training that has to be done. And that's where we're going to need industry to participate, and I think they're ready and willing to do so.
Okay, thank you very much, and I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Congresswoman Clark.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and I share the enthusiasm over having this incredible group of panelists here today. And we have all witnessed the incredible benefits of R&D investments at the NIH, which have produced life-saving vaccines during this pandemic. And I am encouraged by the President's vow to end cancer through proposals like ARPA-H, but I have heard some concerns that a new agency may diminish your base funding. I know that we are eagerly awaiting the President's budget this week, but Dr. Collins, can you do anything to assure us that this new agency can maximize its effectiveness without supplanting any funding from existing budgets at NIH?
I would very much like to reassure you about that. And again, there will be more details available in a couple of days. The proposal, though, is for ARPA-H to provide an opportunity for all of the institutes to be able to take on this DARPA-like approach to projects that could move much more swiftly with the kind of flexibility and nimbleness and risk-taking that ARPA-H will provide. So it augments the capabilities of the rest of what NIH is about. It is not detracting from the base, it's adding a layer of translation, of clinical application that can now go faster. I would also say the way the President's budget rolls out, it proposes a $2.5 billion increase for all of the rest of NIH, which is a pretty reasonable number as well. So when you put that together, I think for cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and everything else, including ALS, Chair DeLauro, we're going to have an opportunity through all of these mechanisms to do more. And the proposal of this total of an increment of $9 billion is going to open up all kinds of vistas of opportunity.
Thank you. And to Dr. Sharpless, we have also heard reports that grant funding has gone down.
Uh-oh. I think I lost Representative Clark.
Let's try to find out if we can get Congressman Clark back. Can they tell me anything?
Let me see.
Well, maybe what we'll do is to
Go to Mr. Klein.
we will come back to Congresswoman Clark. Congressman Klein.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank our witnesses for being here and for their diligent work in developing the vaccine for COVID and for working with its distribution. I want to first start by quoting from a 2011 opinion piece that Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins wrote for the Washington Post, A Flu Virus Risk Worth Taking, where it includes that you conclude, along with support for this research comes a responsibility to ensure that the information is used for good, safeguarding against the potential accidental release or deliberate misuse of laboratory pathogens is imperative. The engineered virus developed in the ferret experiments in your column are maintained in high security laboratories. The scientists, journal editors, and funding agencies involved are working together to ensure that access to specific information that could be used to create dangerous pathogens is limited to those with an established and legitimate need to know. So when I'm looking at a letter that Congressman Mike Gallagher sent to you back in early May, says that that funding for the, sorry, let me find this here, that funding was about $17 million was directed to Echo Health Alliance, and rather than $600,000, much of that was sent to the Wuhan lab. Can you account for the 17 million that was allocated to Echo Lab and speak to the disparity in the amounts that you're discussing, Dr. Fauci?
Yeah, Congressman Klein, it is absolutely correct that about 800,000 was allocated, and about 600,000 was spent over a 5-year period, no more than that. That comes to anywhere between $125,000 and $150,000 per year that went into collaboration with Wuhan. So the number of hundreds of thousands as opposed to millions is correct. The millions number is incorrect. EcoHealth had several millions. I don't know the exact amount that went to EcoHealth, but would be happy to get you that precise number.
I see it now, 13.7 that was allocated to EcoHealth. 17 projects sponsored by NIAID, providing over 7.9 million in federal awards for the research of viral emergence from bats in Southeast Asia. Echo Health Alliance passed some of its funding to WIV, the Wuhan lab, and in 2020, NIH made efforts to obtain information from Echo Health Alliance about Wuhan lab related to concerns about the origins of COVID-19. It says in your letter to Echo Health, it's our understanding that one of the subrecipients is the Wuhan lab. It's our understanding that WIV studies the interaction between coronavirus and bats. And there are now allegations that the current crisis was precipitated by the release from WIV of the coronavirus responsible for COVID-19. Given these concerns, we're pursuing suspension of WIV from participation in federal programs. It's in the public interest that the NIH ensure that a subrecipient has taken all appropriate precautions to prevent the release of pathogens that it's studying. Would you say it's come to your conclusion that the Wuhan lab was not engaged in the safe, in ensuring the safety of its facility as you wrote back in 2011? Is that your conclusion?
I'm sorry, Congressman Klein, I'm not sure what you're reading for. I didn't write anything I don't believe in 2011. You're reading from something that I don't have in front of me. Was that something that I signed?
This is an April 2020 NIH letter to Echo Health Alliance.
I think that was from Building 1, perhaps, but that's not from me.
Okay.
That's from Dr. Michael.
Let me just go ahead and ask real quick. Have you responded to the letter to Congressman Gallagher dated May 5th, Dr. Collins?
There is a draft of that letter that's in the process of going through appropriate clearance and should be received by Congressman Gallagher fairly soon.
Have you responded to the letter from House Commerce Ranking Committee member Kathy McMorris Rogers? She's written two, one dated March 18th, one dated May 6th. Have you responded to either of those?
Again, those responses are in the works. Those were very detailed with some 29 questions and 11 pages and 40 footnotes. So it's taking us a little while.
All right, and you have a May 20th letter from several senators that is waiting for an answer as well.
We do indeed, on similar topics from Senator Johnson and others, and that is also in the works.
All right, thank you.
Let me ask, is Congresswoman Clark back on yet? Congresswoman Frankel.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panel for your great work for saving so many lives. I'm going to start with two questions, somewhat personal. I'm the grandmother of a newborn nursing grandson. I would like to know where we are in terms of implementing any findings that will include pregnant and lactating women in clinical trials.
Dr. Bianchi.
Thank you, Congresswoman Frankel, and congratulations on the birth of your grandson. As you know, one of the goals of the PREGLAC task force was to create recommendations and then create a plan as to how to implement them. And we have already shown a big effect in our institute's priorities because we've established a maternal and pediatric precision therapeutics hub that is going to take the recommendations to the next level and create a center for knowledge around medications that lactating women can take safely and what are the effects on the newborn. So that is coming up, but also the PREGLAC recommendations influenced our institute's strategic plan where we have a whole theme dedicated to safe therapeutics and devices for pregnant women, lactating women, children, and people with disabilities.
Good, thank you very much. If you could keep us posted on that.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, I have another personal question because I had a really lousy night's sleep, probably like a lot of Americans. And, you know, I've read many times that a lack of sleep is related to all kinds of health problems, cognitive impairment. And I'm just curious, and that most Americans are not getting the recommended amount of sleep. I'm just curious, is what kind of research is being done in order to help us sleep better?
It's a great question, Congresswoman. As one of those who's not getting enough sleep, I resonate with your question very personally. And I bet a lot of the other people I'm looking at on this screen are in the same boat, trying to wrestle with all of our responsibilities, especially with COVID-19. Yeah, we have a whole program on sleep research. It's part of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood and Sleep Institute. And Dr. Gibbons, as the director of that institute, might want to take a quick shot at your question about sleep research.
Sure. Thank you, Congresswoman Frankel. As you say, it's a common challenge we all face, but it's clear that sleep and its restorative power is really important to all of our functionality. And indeed, disturbances of sleep appear to affect almost every organ in the body. The body has its own natural rhythm, affects your blood pressure, your body's temperature. In fact, every cell in your body has a clock that has a rhythm that aligns with the clock. And when it's perturbed, it can promote diseases, a number of them related to obesity, diabetes, heart disease. When you have a heart attack, is all influenced by sleep and circadian rhythms. In fact, one of the studies we've been doing in collaboration with Child Health relates to, again, women in pregnancy. And what we've learned is that many women develop a sleep disturbance during pregnancy. That's surprising to men, well known by women. And indeed, that those sleep disturbances in which you stop breathing can impair and have an influence on the course of the pregnancy and on the child. And in fact, we're doing an intervention study after making that observation to see whether interventions that reduce sleep apnea, stopping breathing during sleep, can actually improve outcomes of both mom and child to address that issue.
Dr. Gibbons, sorry to interrupt, but now you're really getting me nervous about this, but what's the cure for us that are for people who are not sleeping? What are you suggesting, or what are you
Well,
researching?
there's simple things that you can do. As it turns out, a lot of them are probably what your grandmother told you, which is when you get good exercise, you tend to have a better sleep. When you have a healthy diet, when you watch your screen time, particularly at night, and you avoid all those distracting noises or eating late, and you actually rest and start to cool down before you go to sleep. All those sleep hygiene habits are non-pharmacologic and can help you get a better sleep.
So basically, we're all toast. Like none of that's going to happen. We're all totally screwed. Excuse my language.
I just want to know if there's a pill.
Well, that's our hope, is that in fact, both lifestyle and even non-pharmacologic things, as well as medication. Certainly in the disease context, we are looking at medications that can be non-addictive that may enhance that. A key part of it is actually in the Common Fund, where we're looking at how can we figure out biomarkers of sleepiness, as well as understand the restorative, refreshing power of sleep in ways that might be able to be manipulated therapeutically.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up with you, and I'll share the research, folks.
Thank you very much, Lois, for opening up the Pandora's box here for all of us here. I understand that Congresswoman Clark is back on, so let me yield to Congresswoman Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Hope this is more successful outing. I had a brief question for Dr. Sharpless about NCI. I just wondered if he could review for us why the National Cancer Institute needs more funding while we're seeing a decline in grants being awarded at the same time.
Sure. So, Congresswoman Clark, our grant applications are up 47%. So we've had this massive influx of new ideas to the NCI. What's gone down is our ability to fund a large percentage of them, because with that many coming in, it's hard to, the pay lines and success rates will decline. So, they nadir'd at about 8% 2 years ago. The success rates are a little higher than that, but that's an important metric. They've now come up to 11%, which is progress, but it's still too low. This is one of the things that's keeping me up at night, frankly, is the idea that there's this great investigator-initiated science in these pools of grants that we're not able to get to. So, for example, that pool of monies funded things like checkpoint inhibitors that cure melanoma, the CAR T cells that cure the leukemia and drugs and problems like that. And then, things like Protax, this new invention to do medicinal chemistry that's all the rage in the pharmaceutical industry presently. All of those came out of this pool of monies. It really drives progress in cancer research. And if 89% of them are not getting funded, that makes me very anxious. So I think that that's our problem, is that we need further support to reach these great ideas, because there may be a cure for pancreatic cancer in there, right? And that's why I think we really need to support them.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that explanation. And Doctors Valkel and Fauci, I want to talk a little bit about COVID survivors who have long-term symptoms. It's come to my attention that patients that have different symptoms, fatigue, depression, brain fog, also can have significant muscle and bone pain. And we are seeing
We will get back for a final question. Congressman Bustos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And obviously, if Catherine comes back on, I'm happy to either yield time to her, or I can start all over as well. Dr. Fauci, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about vaccine hesitancy. We've seen the polls out there, the research out there that talks about the top reasons why people aren't taking the vaccine. They want more evidence that it's safe. They don't think COVID will seriously impact them. They already had COVID and have antibodies. I think those are the top three reasons that we're hearing about. This is more prevalent in rural America, much like a congressional district that I serve, very, very rural. Saw also a poll that found that it's 21% of rural residents are saying now that they definitely would not get a vaccine as compared with about 10% of those who live in more of our bigger cities. So what we're seeing on the ground here in the state of Illinois, we have 102 counties altogether. So we've got the 15 least populated counties. 8 of them are overall the least vaccinated counties. And then of the most populated counties, we've got 11 of those 15 that are doing the best. So again, we're seeing this divide on the ground. We're certainly seeing it in the district that I serve. I'm wondering, Dr. Fauci, as a trusted voice in all of this, what do you have to say to the folks who are holding off getting vaccinated for the reasons that I just listed?
Well, thank you for that question, Congresswoman Bustos. The answer is the first thing we've got to do is make sure we don't point fingers at them for do that and make them feel guilty about that. But you try to explain to them each and every one of the potential reasons why they feel they don't want to get vaccinated. One of the most common is that this was done so quickly that I'm not sure that it's safe. And that you've got to get trusted messengers out there to interact with them. And when I say trusted messages, what we've put together is a COVID-19 community core where there have been thousands of trusted messages. They could be sports figures, celebrities in the entertainment business, clergymen we find, and women we find are having an important role in getting out and extending themselves to address each and every one of the reasons. Because if you just take the time to examine those reasons, there's a really logical, firm, scientifically sound counter to each of those concerns, including the safety, including the quickness that it was done, et cetera. The other thing that we have found interesting, that if you make the capability of getting vaccines to the hesitant people as easy as you possibly can, that mitigates some of the concern. For example, right now in 40,000 pharmacies, including pharmacies that are located in areas that are the rural areas that you're talking about, that anyone can get to a pharmacy within 5 miles of where they are, no matter where they live, that you can go now, walk into a pharmacy, you don't need a computer, you don't need an appointment, you don't need anything. You can just go in and get vaccinated. The same things for mobile units to going into the rural areas when people don't have the transportation capability to get to a place. So there are a lot of things that we are doing. Obviously, we're concerned about vaccine hesitancy because we want to get as many people vaccinated as quickly as we possibly can. But there are many things going on now to try and address that, particularly in those areas that you correctly indicated are more likely to not want to get vaccinated.
Dr. Fauci, in addition to, I'm thinking of, we've got one county in this congressional district that I represent, which is pretty much the entire northwestern corner of the state of Illinois. We have one county that the entire population of the county is a little more than 6,000 people. The vaccination rate there, as of this morning, I get a daily report on this, is 19%. And so I appreciate, here was part of the problem too. They had one phone line to sign up to get the vaccine. That has grown now to 2. The high-speed internet is a problem in a very, very rural county. This is along the Mississippi River. Is there, I don't know, I'm just trying to, I want to do everything that I can to help get those numbers up, but you've got pharmacies, you've got validators, anything else when you think about a very rural part of the country that we might be able to help as members of Congress, or any other ideas you have in a county like I just spelled out?
Yeah, I think mobile units would likely be one of the most important things to do, because you're describing people who don't have real ready access to the kinds of things that would make it really easy. Let me get back to the medical unit at the White House and see if there's anything that could be done, because I believe mobile units to bring the vaccines to those rural areas are probably the best way to do that.
Okay, all right. Well, we would welcome any of that. I'm out of town. Out of time. I'm sorry. So I can't ask my second question that I was going to ask Dr. Collins about Down syndrome, but we'll maybe revisit that another time. Thank you very much, Dr. Fauci, and again to your Dr. Collins, to you and your entire team. Thank you for all you're doing to help people. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
We will have a second round, Congresswoman Busto. So if you can stay, would be happy to get your question in on Down syndrome. I'm going to ask again if Congresswoman Clark is
I am
okay.
here. Can you hear me?
Yes, go for the last bit here with your seconds, and then we're going to have another round, Catherine.
Okay, super quick. I'm concerned about the rise in prescriptions for COVID long haulers to address some of the bone pain and other medical pain they are experiencing. I wonder if this concern is shared by Dr. Fauci and Dr. Volkow, and if we are looking at non-opiate treatments for the neurological effects.
Dr. Volkow.
Opioids are quite addictive, and this highlights actually why it is so important that we continue training on the proper use of opioid medications, but also on the proper management of pain, many instances not requiring opioids, which of course trigger the whole opioid crisis. But this is also why one of the priorities of the HEAL initiative, for which we got specific funds by Congress allocated to address the challenges of the opioid crisis, one of the main initiatives is to accelerate the development of effective pain medications that are non-addictive.
Thank you, and thank you for your patience, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. Yes, Congresswoman Watson-Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Collins, and to all of your colleagues. This has been so helpful, and it's so good to talk to you scientists about the value of science. Dr. Fauci, I have a quick question for you. I'm like Lois, I've got a personal issue here. I've got an 8-year-old granddaughter that I don't want to go back to school until she's vaccinated. How close are we to getting children vaccinated from that age?
Yeah. Unfortunately, Congresswoman, I don't believe that they're going to be able to be vaccinated by the time the fall term comes. We certainly will get high school adolescent individuals vaccinated then, but the age de-escalation studies that we're doing to get to an 8-year-old would likely not be available towards the end of this calendar year, but at the latest, the first quarter of 2022. I would imagine late fall, early winter.
So does that concern you about sending your granddaughter back to school under those conditions? Should we be seeking continued virtual educating?
Well, what the CDC and other organizations, but certainly the CDC is trying to do is, given the number of and the percentage of teachers that will be vaccinated, that are already vaccinated, that there should be no reason not to get children of any age back to in-person school by the time we get to the fall term. I myself would not be, I don't have children that young, but I would not be concerned when we get to the fall. The reason I say that, Congresswoman, because if you look at the rate of vaccinations now, what is an important factor in the safety of the children is the degree of infection that's ongoing in the community. And if you look at the last few weeks, the number of infections per day have gone down in a very steady, encouraging manner, from 60,000 a day to 50 to 40 to now we're well into lower than 30. If we get to the president's goal of getting 70% of adults vaccinated with at least one dose by July 4th, I believe by the time we get to the fall, that even though young children might not be vaccinated, it will be really rather safe in school. I do believe that.
I pray so. I pray so, and I thank you for being such a stand-up person throughout all of this. Dr. Collins, I am very interested in NIH as it relates to all of the space that it could improve in terms of diversity, whether it's the researchers, the clinical participants, whether it is the individuals or the groups or the work groups that review these grants. I am interested in all of that. And in last year's funding bill, I added the language that it would ask the NIH to develop a strategic plan and establish a working group to address the lack of diversity among researchers and staff and among those who are reviewing the grants. And I realize that you have initiated the Unite program since March. I really would like to know some of the specific strategies that you all are employing to get at and overcome these barriers. And I'd like to know what have you been actually focusing on in these initiatives, and what is your intention with regard to continued reporting back to us on the progress which is made. I'm really interested in some of the strategies that you're employing to this extent.
Congresswoman, those are great questions, and we appreciate your asking us for this strategic plan, and appreciate also Congress giving us a little bit more time, because we are in the midst of this groundbreaking Unite initiative, which touches on all the areas you've just mentioned. Time is short, but I'll give you one example of how we're seeking to really improve the diversity of our workforce. Most of our workforce, of course, is out there in our grantee institutions. 85% of our money goes to those academic institutions where the science gets done. And yet their workforce is not as diverse as it could be. And when they go to try to recruit individuals of diverse backgrounds, oftentimes they're not successful. Or if they are successful, individuals are recruited but then not retained. A new model where we would encourage them, and this is now possible to do with an additional common fund program, to recruit not just single individuals from underrepresented groups, but a cohort, and to bring them on board collectively together, something that we've piloted in our intramural program with considerable success. And then they are not like the only person of color in their community of researchers. They have this kind of opportunity to arrive together, to be mentored, to be encouraged. This is a program called FIRST, F-I-R-S-T, and I think we're going to watch closely to see what this does in terms of expanding the capabilities of our workforce to be more diverse. And this is not just something we're doing because it's a nice idea. We know that diversity equals productivity, and we want to be sure we're not missing out on that productivity by the lack of our diversity in many of our institutions. We're going to work really hard on that.
And I thank you, and I'm going to want to hear about the use of HBCUs in this. And I'm also going to want to understand sort of contractual relationship you have with the grantees that are expected to bring on this diversity, and whether or not their measurement of success is connected to the stability of these diverse researchers and professionals. So those are some of the areas I'm very interested in. I've run out of time, unfortunately, but I yield back and I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Congressman Harder.
Thank you so much, Chair DeLauro, for hosting this hearing, and thank you so much to all of our witnesses for taking the time to be here and sharing their testimonies. I wanted to take this in a little bit of a different direction than what we've been doing so far and talk about asthma and air quality, which are two interconnected issues in our district. Many of the cities in the California Central Valley are classified as the most polluted cities in the US for both particulate matter and ozone pollution. That has a lot of direct impacts on the health of folks in our community, especially for kids. 1 in 6 children in the San Joaquin Valley have asthma, the highest in the state, and I believe among the highest in the country. And asthma prevalence across the valley has reached as high as 20% in school-age kids. I had childhood asthma as a kid. My brother had it. It's incredibly and heartbreakingly common in our area. We've, of course, seen that in the health data even afterwards. We have among the highest emergency room visits for asthma in California. And add in the devastating wildfires in California, as well as the respiratory impacts of COVID-19, and it really creates a lot of impact for our healthcare system, and some of the costs are high. And yet it seems like we haven't necessarily made major breakthroughs in asthma research in recent decades, and many Americans are resistant to current asthma therapies. Dr. Gibbons, I'd love to hear from you as the director of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. What can you tell us about the use of federal funds to research and develop programming to address childhood asthma? And is there more that this committee can be doing to assist in this program?
Thank you for that important question, Congressman Harder. As you point out, asthma is one of the leading chronic conditions of children in general. It certainly affects certain communities disproportionately. You recognize the rural health challenges. In addition, similar patterns are seen in communities of color, inner city, underserved communities, where again, these exposures can be concentrated. Indeed, that's an area of research in part related to the ECHO program. It's a children's study where we've been assessing that. We've learned through those studies that exposure to air pollution, particularly early in life, actually has an influence on lung development. We've learned that lung development actually continues all through childhood, even into early adulthood. It's driving the overall reserve and structure of the lungs over time. And that's why it's so important, as you indicate, to mitigate those exposures that are happening both in these rural communities and some of the inner city communities that also are in these hot spots or pockets of high air pollution. We also are making progress in further defining the mechanisms of the disease to advance therapeutics beyond the drugs that have been currently existed and used for the last decade or so. Indeed, we've been engaged in a program called Top Med in Precision Medicine, in which we've gathered together cohorts of children and adults with asthma in a large sequencing study to identify new mediators of asthma as a means of developing new targets and new therapeutics. Similarly, we've developed platforms in which we are starting to engage in precision medicine for asthma. We call it Precise, where we are recognizing asthma as kind of a catch-all and recognizing that there's certain subsets of patients that may respond to particular agents that have a certain biological impact. And indeed,
that research sounds terrific. I want to make sure that I have a chance for ask a second question as well. Sure. I appreciate that. I think that's a great segue to my question for Dr. Collins, which is in the president's budget, there's a proposed $110 million for the Climate Change and Human Health Program. Could you describe some of the research projects that you expect to come from that, especially any projects that focus on health outcomes related to poor air quality and how it impacts underserved communities like ours? Do you see that as a big piece of where this money is going to go or not?
Absolutely. And it does tie in very nicely to the question you just posed to Dr. Gibbons. Climate change affects human health in numerous ways. People tend to think about it as perhaps it's more in the area of infectious disease, and there's a lot to be concerned about there as well, as climate makes different opportunities for different pathogens to find their way into the human population. But it also affects, as you've just pointed out, air quality, the issues that are going to relate to such things as asthma, as well as heart disease, as well as cancer. All of those are wrapped up in what we think is now an appropriate moment for an enhanced and expanded effort to understand the health consequences of climate change. Our National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, NIEHS, will be taking the lead on this, but already they have reached out to numerous other institutes at NIH so that we can come forward with a really exciting, very broad, holistic approach to how we could tackle this issue of environmental science related to health and the effects of the climate. So I'm glad you highlighted it. We're excited about the opportunity here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Collins. I yield back.
Congresswoman Lawrence.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman DeLauro. I represent a majority minority district in Michigan, and the past year has exposed the alarming disparities for communities of color. I believe it's absolutely critical that we act on these disparities to develop a plan for research. Dr. Collins, it was heartbreaking when I saw the disproportionate number of African Americans being hospitalized and dying from this past pandemic. And it's almost as if in unison, the response was, well, it's expected because they have underlying conditions. When are we going to start planning, and what is the plan to address these underlying conditions in the Black community, which I know are multiple? We have access to healthcare is an issue. Food deserts, lack of proper nutrition, obesity. We are the highest in heart disease and cancer. And so I want us as a country to move from, yes, this is the problem, to this is what we're going to do. So can you please talk to me how the Minority Health and Health Disparities Institute, when will we start seeing a plan and results of that?
Well, your question is incredibly well articulated, and it certainly resonates with myself and my colleagues as we really have to look at what's happened with COVID-19 as another example of just how devastating health disparities are in the United States, and that those same populations that have suffered from disparities like obesity, diabetes, hypertension, got hit extremely hard by COVID-19. And nobody can look at that and not say, we've got a serious issue here. If your zip code is a stronger predictor of your longevity than your DNA code, and it certainly is, there is something seriously awry here in terms of the way in which structural racism, which undergirds so much of what's happening institutionally and across the country, has played out in terms of health effects. We at NIH have been studying minority health and health disparities intensively over the course of many years. I think we are energized by these observations, and again, by this Unite initiative that I've mentioned already, to go deeper, to really understand not just what are the causes of health disparities. Some people have cynically called that admiring the problem, but actually to intervene and to come up with studies that would involve those kinds of interventions to see if they work. We can't fix the healthcare system in the United States as the NIH, we're the research organization, but we can organize studies to see what would happen if you changed certain approaches to health and other aspects that are contributing to this. And we aim to do that with a new Common Fund program that is more aggressive than what has been possible before. So we're right with you.
Thank you. And I am on the executive board of the Black Caucus, and I'm also co-chair of the Women's Caucus. So my philosophy in life is that you can't tell me what the problem is more than once, because once you can identify it, then let's get about fixing it. My next question is about mental health. The other thing that COVID ripped the scab off during this pandemic is the critical need for mental health care, and especially in our children. Dr. Collins, realizing the alarming rates of mental illness, how will the National Institute of Mental Health leverage the partnerships to ensure that the grant recipients receive the cutting edge discoveries in this field? And how do we move mental health to the front of the
Well, you're quite right that this is another crisis, and COVID-19 has accentuated it. We can see that both the disease itself, which is capable of inspiring various mental health issues, depression, and sometimes even frank psychosis, but just frankly, the whole experience that our country has had where mental health services have oftentimes been injured by a lack of access because of the concerns about being in the physical space together. The one bright light in all this, Congresswoman, is the way in which, because of COVID-19, we have seen telemedicine finding its way into the mental health arena in ways that it previously hadn't. And we have a number of research studies underway right now that are looking pretty promising in terms of showing that that actually works really well. And if there's a silver lining here, it might be that we learn how to use mental health services remotely by telemedicine in a way that benefits people who otherwise just don't have access to those services. That's just one example. There are many other things we need to do. We have big programs now trying to come up with new approaches to treat depression, for instance, in ways that would not be the traditional methods with the traditional drugs, but other approaches that might be more successful. It's a huge, broad portfolio in that particular part of NIH that I'd love to tell you more about if we had more time.
Thank you, Doctor, and thank you all.
Thank you. What I would like to do now is I think we can move to a second round, and we will make it a 3-minute round and try to please hold to the 3 minutes so we give everyone a chance to ask additional questions of our panelists. And with that, let me start off. Dr. Fauci, This is about the universal flu. I'm going to ask three, and I've got two questions, and I want to get Dr. Gibbons in as well. With regard to the universal flu, does the mRNA technology show promise for use in vaccines for other diseases such as flu? Is there hope that mRNA technology could be used to develop a universal flu vaccine? What other progress has been made in the past year towards developing a universal flu vaccine?
Thank you for those important questions, Madam Chair. The answer to your first question is that the mRNA technology, which, as you know, is spectacularly successful in developing a COVID-19, is now being used in a number of other attempts of vaccines, including a universal influenza vaccine, including vaccines against HIV, and including in cancer immunotherapy. So mRNA is now very exciting. It's very interesting that you asked that question about where we are with other areas of universal flu vaccine. Just today, we started a phase 1 trial on the nanoparticle using a mosaic where we have multiple different hemagglutinins. These are the different colors that are now very, very promising because we have at least 4 or 5 different hemagglutinins to cover the waterfront of the troublesome influenza components that we're dealing with. And literally, it just started today, a phase 1 trial to see if what's called a nanoparticle mosaic approach towards universal flu vaccine. So thank you for asking that question. This is what it looks like.
This is fabulous. It looks like something I would have in my office as well, Dr. Fauci. So thank you. Thank you. Dr. Gibbons, this is about cardiovascular disease in women. 2017, 300,000 women died as a result of heart disease. And heart disease and stroke, leading cause of death of women in the United States. Critical research in heart disease. Quick update on NHLBI's supported research. Yeah, let me go there. And I don't think that there's we need to have more information out about women and heart disease and what we're doing on that research. Dr. Gibbons.
Yes, thank you for that. Yes, we need to continue to beat the drum of awareness and ensure that all women recognize that it is the #1 killer. We've actually polls and surveys suggest that we may even be moving backwards in that regard, particularly in communities of color.
But tell me about how much time and money are we spending on heart research for women?
Well, we can give you that exact number, but it's certainly one of our highest priorities. A couple of examples include leveraging the Women's Health Initiative, where we've found out about the physical activity in elderly women. And we're now doing an intervention study to demonstrate that it is both safe to engage in exercise and indeed still improve cardiovascular health in elderly women.
Dr. Gibbons, what I'm going to do is ask you, because my time is out. I would like to follow up with you and get information, chapter and verse, about what we are doing on heart disease and women, and how much research, how many research dollars are being appropriated to do that. So thank you. And with that, Congressman Cole, let me yield to you.
Delighted. Thank you.
You're the chair. You're never out of time, #1. And #2, when Dr. Fauci held that thing up, I thought that should be in Rose's office. So we think exactly the same way. Let me first go to Dr. Collins. A couple of my colleagues have raised, and I think very appropriately, concerns about China. But look, we know China's sort of a bad actor. They'll steal anything that's not nailed down. And we have plenty of evidence of them trying to penetrate our research with in the biomedical sphere in particular. So I'd like you to take a moment and tell us what you're doing in response to that. What are the things that are underway at the NIH to make sure that our intellectual property is safe, and frankly that science is used in an appropriate way, which I think our people at the NIH do. I'm not sure their Chinese counterparts always do as well. I don't mean that individually. I mean that in a regime sense.
Well, I appreciate the question. This is a very serious issue, and one where we, the NIH, I think, are out in front of all the science agencies in trying to be sure that our resources are not being misused and intellectual property being appropriated inappropriately to another country. First of all, let me say that we depend for the success of the American scientific enterprise on a broad diversity of folks who come to our country from other places and contribute wonderfully to progress, including winning Nobel Prizes. And I want to be really clear that the vast majority of those foreign-born scientists are wonderful additions to our community that we greatly value. But there are some bad actors. We have been very aggressive in seeking those out, finding examples of individuals, and yes, most of them are from China, who have been supported through something called the 1,000 Talents Program or similar programs like that from China, where they basically have deceived us in terms of the support they have for their work from the Chinese government, and in some instances have in fact been diverting intellectual property as a result. We've acted on that. We've worked with the FBI. There have been at least 80 instances of individuals who have quickly resigned or been terminated, and there are criminal actions that have been undertaken in some instances. So I think we are taking this with the greatest seriousness and watching for other examples. I think nobody at this point would imagine that we're looking the other way. We're looking really carefully to try to identify if there are people who are misusing the resources that we provide them, that we will not allow that to continue.
Well, I very much appreciate that and commend you for your diligence and urge you to double down on that. Dr. Fauci, if I could turn to you very quickly. I'm very interested in the efforts on tick-borne research. One of our best supporters that's not on this committee is our good friend from New Jersey, Chris Smith. That's been an interest of his, and honestly, I appreciate his advocacy for this program. So I want to give you a chance to update us on that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Congressman Cole. We actually, as you probably know, the HHS has a tick-borne disease working group, which we are now coordinating work not only at the NIH, but also with the CDC and other agencies to address tick-borne disease, particularly one that is particularly problematic, as you well know, is Lyme disease. We still have what I believe is not yet an adequate vaccine to be able to be used. We had one vaccine early on that was not used, probably because of, I think, some ill-advised concern that was not really justified about the toxicity of the vaccine, which it really was not. So we're going to be starting all over again to try and do that. There are a number of other things also, looking at how you can block transmission by inhibiting proteins in the ticks that actually transmit it. So there are 4 or 5 other things that are going on right now. So we're taking that very seriously because, as we all know, tick-borne disease, particularly Lyme disease, is of concern as you get into the post-Lyme syndrome, which is something that is bothersome not only to individuals, but actually to communities as a whole, where you have a lot of Lyme disease in a community. So we're on it.
Very much. Appreciate that, Madam Chair. Thanks for the indulgence on the time. I yield back.
Thank you. Congresswoman Roybal Allard.
Dr. Collins, according to a 2019 survey, USA nationwide poll, 80% of voters said that medical researchers seeking funding for animal tests should first be required to show that an alternative is not available. Unfortunately, this is not always the case. The OIG reports have repeatedly found that failure to search for alternatives to pain procedures and to document the availability of alternatives in research proposal is common, and scientists who have served on laboratory oversight committees have echoed this concern. I'm going to ask all 3 questions in the hope that I can get to Dr. Volkov. What role has NIH played in educating the research community about non-animal research methods? What steps is NIH taking to incentivize researchers to utilize existing human non-animal approaches? And have you offered any training grants, early stage investigator awards, or supplementary grant funding to give researchers the resources and confidence needed to switch from an animal-based to animal-free research method?
Well, very quickly, because I know you want to ask another question. We are very much interested in trying to be sure that every experiment that involves animals is done appropriately with rigor and reproducibility, and that the animal model is in fact one that's going to give valuable information for human health. In many instances, there really are no alternatives to the animal model to be able to get those answers. And so we need to support that to be sure we're doing it, though, with great responsibility. In terms of grants to others, yes, we are supporting vigorously such things as tissue chips, which allow you to look at the effect of a drug or some other intervention in a chip that is basically made up of human cells, maybe closer to humans. But that doesn't work for lots of other applications, so we still are going to need animals. But we are looking at this as vigorously as we can, looking forward to a time where we have more substitutions. I think, though, to be honest, for the foreseeable future, if we're going to make advances in things like cancer, diabetes, heart disease, rare diseases, we are still going to need to depend for a lot of that effort on animal research.
Okay. Well, I look forward to working with you on this issue. I'll be introducing a bill, which I'd like to talk to you about later. Dr. Volkov, the last time we met, you were starting to do some research on marijuana. Can you give us an update on the research that you're doing and the impact of marijuana on the brain, especially the developing brain?
We're not hearing.
Research on marijuana, and one of the most prominent ones is targeted towards understanding in a longitudinal study in a large sample size of children how exposure to marijuana may influence the development of the brain, how it may influence cognition and behaviors, and how ultimately it may affect their performance at school. The study is ongoing, and it already has resulted in publications that, for example, show that the use of marijuana during pregnancy was associated with delayed development of the newborn brain. But this is not the only project that we are doing. We are actually very interested also on establishing better ways of standardizing the metrics of consumption so that when people look at whether it is for medical purposes or to understand negative consequences, what are the doses that people are being exposed to? So yes, we have not neglected at all this area of research. It's extremely important.
I see my time is up. Thank you so much.
Congressman Harris.
Thank you very much. And first, I just want to correct the record. I think Mr. Pocan paraphrased what my question was about the Wuhan Institute. It did not have to do with globally not funding overseas research. It had to do with through the indirect costs that are associated with grants, actually sending monies to the Wuhan Institute of Virology when we don't know if they're doing gain-of-function research. Now, Dr. Collins, although you do mention that Moderna might not have had a problem with the transfer of IP to other countries regarding vaccines, I will tell you that the CEO of Pfizer certainly had a different opinion. And the CEO of the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, certainly has a different opinion about that effect. And I'd ask unanimous consent to enter their statements into the record that oppose the transfer of intellectual property to other countries. I'm also concerned, Dr. Collins, because you are, the Researcher General of the country, that you would, I hope that you'll take a position on the effect of HR 3 if it should become law, on the negative impact it would have on research. And I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a report from Vital Transformations, a group that would report on the devastating effect it would have on biotechnology research going forward, since so much of our biotechnology research is funded by private companies, not by the NIH. Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent that they be entered into the record.
Ordered. Sorry, so ordered.
Thank you. Now, just two very quick things. One is that I do worry about therapeutics, and we seem to have solved the vaccine problem, but therapeutics are an issue because if variants become prevalent and our vaccines don't work against some new variants, therapeutics will be important. And I was a little concerned that BARDA suddenly suspended their broad agency announcement. Of course, that the NIH is not BARDA. But there was no public explanation why, and some unofficial discussions indicated that the funding was being channeled to NIH. So I would hope that NIH and Dr. Collins, that you share my concern for the vital importance of the private sector in funding our biotechnology research. And just a final question for Dr. Volkow. Put plainly, is recreational use of marijuana in youth with a still developing brain a good idea?
No.
Okay, so there is no new research that shows somehow, because there's an acceleration among states of legalizing recreational marijuana, but there's no research that would indicate, new research, that it's actually not a bad thing. Is that right? There's no new research indicating that it's good for developing brains, for instance.
There is no new research indicating that it is benign in young people, but there is increasing research indicating that it has deleterious effects.
Okay, thank you very much. And I yield back the few remaining seconds I have,
Okay.
Chairman.
Yes. Congress. Congresswoman Lee.
Very much. Yes, this has been such an informative hearing, but also gives me a lot of hope. It's truly life affirming, all of the work that you do. And I wanted to follow up with Dr. Gibbons on so many of the issues that we've been working with over the years as it relates to diseases that I have personal knowledge of that NIH has been so helpful in putting on the radar and conducting research. One is our COPD action plan. You all know my late mother died from complications of COPD, and I'd like to know where we are with our COPD plan. Secondly, with the issue of multiple sclerosis, again, the research, where we are on MS in terms of a cure. Of course, many of you know my sister has MS, and I've worked on this issue for many, many years. Finally, Dr. Gibbons, the whole issue around sickle cell disease, where we are in terms of a cure, and have we figured out how to address the sickle cell trait as it relates to HIV, as it relates to diabetes, and how to identify those most, prone to sickle cell trait and the A1C test.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman. Again, we appreciate your leadership in this area, and again, in the spirit of your mom. We are making continued advances in COPD. Again, our TopMed program of precision medicine, where we've sequenced over 150,000 individuals, has been a key driver of that, where we're starting to identify pathways that may be driving that. We hope that'll usher in a new generation of therapeutics. With regard to sickle cell, we're very excited about the opportunity that's on the horizon to cure sickle cell disease. And we have made substantial progress in a number of trials now that are testing various curative genetic therapies that offer a lot of promise and have very encouraging preliminary results that suggest that we may be very much on the brink of a transformative kind of therapy to advance the lives of those living with sickle cell disease. Critical to your point about sickle cell trait, that if indeed we have a curative therapy, it'll be critical that there be genetic counseling to identify early on who's at most risk and therefore eventually could be cured from this disease. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you, Madam Chair, very much. Thank you all for this hearing.
Thank you.
Yield my time.
Congresswoman Herrera Butler.
Madam Chair. And Dr. Volkow, just following up on what Dr. Harris was mentioning, you said you do see deleterious effects on the developing brain. To what age are brains developing? Just so that I have an endpoint on that.
Our brain does not stop developing until our mid-20s.
Okay, so people who are legally allowed to purchase recreational marijuana are still possibly developing, and it can have a deleterious effect on their brains.
That is correct. And we're doing the studies to actually document how it negatively affects the brain.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, switching gears a little bit, in one of your blogs about and I'm speaking fast to get it all in, Monitoring Our Futures survey for 2020, you basically, I wanted to see when we can expect to see results from the supplemental funds NIDA issued to research the impact of the pandemic on adolescents' risk of substance use.
We already are getting some of the results back. For example, one of the questions that we had was the extent to which the COVID pandemic was going to negatively influence vaping, which has been taken up so rapidly by teenagers. And what the data seems to show is in some instances when the parents are there at home, this has resulted in a decrease in vaping among teenagers. Overall. So that's one example. But on the other hand, we're seeing negative effects, for example, of alcohol drinking or smoking in those families where the parents actually themselves take these drugs, or they are not at home to observe the behavior of these teenagers.
Got it. Thank you.
And we will get more data.
Thank you. I look forward to that. I'm going to switch over, I think, to Dr. Gibbons. Yes. So acute and chronic kidney disease in children often, well, maybe in children, which doctor in children often differs from that in adults, both in its underlying causes and its treatments. There are not enough pediatric nephrologists, not enough pediatric researchers, and we continue to struggle to obtain funding for research proposals, or at least the ones that are out there do. Without this funding, children with kidney disease are not able to benefit from the resources that Congress allocates to NIH and NIDDK. So what is NIH doing to ensure that study sections have access to pediatric subspecialist reviewers who have the unique expertise required to review pediatric research proposals? And what other steps are y'all taking to ensure research in this area meets the needs of children with kidney disease? Dr. Bianchi.
Dr. Bianchi is probably better positioned to respond.
Yes, so we have formed actually a trans NIH Pediatric Research Consortium, or NPERC, and that group meets every other month to discuss areas of shared interest. We happen to have a pediatric nephrologist on that committee. We also have a representative from the Center for Scientific Review. So the CSR knows that we're very interested in getting more pediatric reviewers onto the study sections. And by having a representative there, that person can hear what we're discussing. And we're particularly interested in adolescence, which is a gap area across NIH, and also the transition of adolescents to adulthood in terms of transferring their medical care. We recently had a workshop on that whole issue. So it's a very active area of research.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Congressman Pocan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dr. Volkow, I have a question for you. In the last appropriations bill that we did, we added some language that said the committee encourages NIDA to expand research on all health aspects of kratom. Specifically, we talked about for people who may be abusing opioids, how it can help. We also directed some funds to the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, $500,000 to do such. And we've had some promising results come back on that. Just in the last month, the FDA did a major raid on a company in Florida on kratom, using some old rhetoric that the FDA used to use in this area. I know there's no new there's no new head of FDA, but have you had any conversations with them? And there's also a letter we've just recently got access to from 2018 sent from the Secretary of HHS to DEA about kratom, saying, back off our early guidance. We were wrong. We need research on this. Have you had any conversations with the FDA or anything we can do? Because I do think there's some really strong results for people who are getting addicted to opioids that can be helped by kratom. And now we're seeing the opposite actions happening again under the FDA.
We have not had discussions with the FDA during the COVID pandemic, but we did have them beforehand. We're very interested on the products, the chemicals that are within kratom, most notable mitragynine, which has many interesting properties that could be of value potentially as a medication for pain, but also interestingly, they could also hold value as treatments for addiction. At the same time, we are aware that kratom can produce addiction in some instances and that it can have toxicity. Therefore, highlighting why it is so important to actually do research on this substance that people are taking. They are taking it for multiple things.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. If it would be possible, since the FDA doesn't have a technical head right now, to maybe reach out to them and let them know some of this, because we really appreciate that great research work that you're advocating for right now. Thank you. Dr. Collins, isn't it true, I believe you updated the report in the last year, that in the last, now I believe it was decade, every single drug approved by the FDA had NIH research support. Is that correct?
That is correct. That was 100% of those drugs, and that was a study done by Dr. Fred Ledley and published in the Proceedings of the National Academy.
Yeah, I've got that document, and Madam Chair, without objection, I'd like to enter that into the record as well. And then finally, very quick, Dr. Collins, if you had 10, 20, $70 billion more, literally, what would that mean as far as research, and what new areas would we be going into in a very quick amount of time?
What a lovely question. You know, a lot of it would be basically that we could provide for this amazing research workforce that's out there the opportunity to pursue all kinds of ideas that we currently can't quite get to. We're still only funding about 1 grant application out of 5 And I know we are leaving really good science on the table when that happens. To be healthy, really to take advantage of all that creativity, it ought to be at least 1 out of 3. So that would be a big part of what I would do. And I would particularly focus on those early stage investigators. They're our future. They're the ones that are most vulnerable when things seem a little tight. And we'd want to be sure that they felt this experience to be something that was going to be sustainable. And particularly if they come from diverse backgrounds where we have this need, as we've been talking about in this whole hearing, to enhance the ability of all those different voices to come and join us to make their careers out of biomedical research and for us to sustain them. That's what I'd want to do, is just make sure the whole landscape is advantaged by this kind of opportunity.
Thank you very much, and working towards that with DOD, but we'll get back to you on it, and I yield back to Madam Chair.
Thank you. Congressman Klein.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me start with a question for Director Collins. There was an NIH OIG report from January of last year that found that NIH resolved 262 of the 487 audit recommendations that were outstanding during FY 2015 and 2016. However, it did not resolve about 63%, or 166 out of the 262 recommendations within the 6-month resolution period required. And in addition, as of September 30th of 2016, NIH had not resolved 225 audit recommendations that were past due for resolution. Are you familiar with this report, Director Collins?
This is a report about our IT systems and cybersecurity.
It's several different audit recommendations, but the OIG report, yes.
So yes, I'm very familiar, and we have worked hard working with IG to respond to those. And I think actually a lot of work got done that doesn't necessarily get reflected in that report, in that we inspired actions across the board. And the actual numbers now of responses would be considerably better than what you have seen there. So yes, I think all organizations are struggling a bit with this. Many of us have had government agencies have been around a long time, and the new era of cybersecurity is challenging us. And we are going to need more resources for that as well, in order to try to be sure we're doing everything we can to keep the bad actors out of our systems.
Well, I was pleased to find that a March 2020 OIG report found that NIH successfully checks all applications to identify instances of duplicate grant funding. As funding levels are increased and new grants are established, the federal government does continue to grow. This dramatic increase in federal spending is of great concern. And I'm reminded of a quote by Milton Friedman, who said, "Nothing so permanent as a temporary government program." Can you answer what safeguards you're putting in place that work to eliminate duplicative funding from NIH?
We've worked hard on that, Congressman, because we are in agreement. Every dollar that the taxpayer is providing, that you, the Congress, give to us, needs to be considered as something that we hold a great deal of responsibility for. We are able, through our now very much far advanced portfolio analysis system, to see exactly what's in our portfolio, what we're funding. And we can compare what's in our grant portfolio with other agencies like the National Science Foundation, like ARC, like the Department of Defense, and identify if there are instances where somebody is basically trying to double dip. And if we find those, obviously, we're going to take appropriate action. So I think I can reassure you that we are on top of that, using a lot of the latest tools for doing text mining to discover things like that.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. Congresswoman Frankel.
Hello, thank you again. I have a couple of questions. First, I think this would go to Dr. Sharpless. Gynecological cancers are impacting millions of women each year. Yet I'm told that we are experiencing a declining NCI funding levels, and that there's a very huge disproportionate amount between what is funded for example, prostate cancer versus ovarian, cervical, and uterine cancer. It's almost like I'll just give one example. Not that I want less for prostate cancer. That's not the point here. But 1.8 million per person of years life lost for prostate, ovarian, 97,000. So I guess really the question is, do we need more money for research for women's gynecological cancers?
Thank you for raising the issue, and this is something we've looked at carefully. I share your concerns about funding major diseases like endometrial cancer, ovarian cancer, and cervical cancer. I think if you look at our GYN portfolio, there are some really strong areas of progress, but also some areas where we need to see more attention. I would say endometrial in particular is an area that we've spoken to the community about and heard a lot about, where I think we can do more. We have seen some really remarkable progress in these areas. Our networks enroll something like 675 women on GYN oncology trials. We have these specialized programs of research excellence, these large grants, and I think we have 7 of those now dedicated to gynecologic malignancies, including 5 in ovarian cancer. So I think that we have to take the opportunity to fund where the scientific availability is, but it's certainly an area that we're watching closely.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt, but do you need more funding for that kind of research? That's the question.
Well, I think as I answered earlier, we have a lot of grants that we can't get to, and we certainly have a lot of great gynecological malignancy grants in that pool of monies that we're unable to get to. So yes, I think more funding for gynecologic malignancy research would be very much appreciated.
Okay, so if you could just follow up with an amount, that would be helpful.
Sure.
And, I did have another question, Madam Chair, but I guess I don't really have time for it. There's only 32 seconds. Okay, you're going to let me ask it. Well, here's the thing.
No,
you're not going to let me ask it.
I'm not going to let you ask it. No, I thought you were waiting for an answer from Dr. Sharpless. And I'm just, okay, so, and then.
So, Dr. Sharpless, you want to answer that question? How much more do you need?
Oh, we will provide that to you, that number to you. Let us give it a thought.
Okay, thank you so much. Now I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Congresswoman Watson-Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tackling on to what Lois just said, I agree. I support additional resources in this area, particularly concerned about issues of the disparity in outcomes in health as it relates to some of these issues like uterine cancer, like cervical cancer, and its disparate impact on Black women. Like sickle cell anemia, when are we going to be able to really be able to tackle this disease? And also maternal and infant mortality and morbidity. I just kind of want to lay them on the table. I know they're of concern. Some of them have been mentioned. I just need to know that they are part of the priorities. And even with all the competing needs and requests, that these issues of disparity in healthcare and in outcomes to minorities in particular are one of your top priorities. And Dr. Collins, you can just answer for everybody.
I am answering for everybody. Absolutely, yes. And you will see when the president's budget is fully fleshed out in a couple of days that health disparity research is going to be one of the most highly prominently featured areas that we want to do more. Let me just quickly ask Dr. Bianchi to say something about maternal mortality, because we haven't talked about it at this hearing, and we have this program she can tell you about called Include, which I think is really important.
No, improve, not include.
Yes, right. I got the wrong answer.
Implementing maternal health and pregnancy outcomes vision for everyone. And this was in response to the meeting that we had pre-pandemic with the Black Maternal Health Caucus, where we were challenged to do something. And indeed we did. And last time when I came to this committee in early March of 2020, we introduced it. But since then, we have funded over $7 million in grants addressing disparities in maternal morbidity and mortality. And we as an institute are very committed to this. We are the largest funder in maternal health research. And just as an example, in California, research that we funded implemented a quality improvement to address obstetric hemorrhage, which was an area of major disparity between Black women and white women. And by implementing 17 recommendations, the rate of severe morbidity in Black women went down by 9%. So it had a.
Doctor, I know that there's a lot being done. I want you to know I need to give New Jersey a shout out. Our First Lady, Tammy Murphy, and our governor, they have made this a priority in New Jersey. And I'm sure they're looking for the funding, but they're also looking to be a model. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Congresswoman Lawrence? Okay. And with that, let me yield to the ranking member for any closing remarks that he would like to make.
Sorry, Madam Chair, it took a minute to unmute. You came to me faster than I anticipated. Very happy to have the opportunity. First, I want to begin by thanking you for this hearing. This, it's wonderful to hear how many members on both sides of the aisle say, this is my favorite hearing of the year. And more profoundly, I want to thank you for your partnership over 6 years in the majority and the minority in working to increase the resources available to the NIH. And I think your questions and some of the responses we got, certainly from Dr. Collins and others, showed what a difference this subcommittee has made by prioritizing this particular investment for the American people. It saved a lot of lives, in a variety of ways, but certainly in the pandemic that we've been going through. I'm really proud of what this committee did, and I'm very proud of what the NIH more profoundly accomplished in this year, not only for us, but for all of humanity. Everybody in the world benefited from this investment. So I'm pleased and proud about that. I also want to do something that's probably a little unusual. I want to associate myself with the remarks of Mr. Bocan. We don't agree on everything. We agree on this. If we could do additional resources here, that would be wonderful. Although, again, I really want to point out, I'm very pleased with what the administration has proposed as a top line. I have some questions about how we should distribute those funds and whether ARPA-H should get exactly the amount we're talking about, or we should put that to more traditional things and let this initiative grow. But those are matters of discussion and debate. They're not matters of disagreement. So I certainly will be working hard with you to see that we reach these top lines, because I think they're really important for the American people. I will disagree with my friend from Wisconsin on one thing. I shouldn't come at the expense of defense. And I just say this as an old historian. The cost of great power rivalry in history is very high. And we should not underestimate the kind of world we live in today with China and Russia. It's a dangerous world. So we can debate, and we will in another forum, what's appropriate for defense. I don't think that investment there, whether it's as high as I would like or lower as others might prefer, should interfere with this investment, because I think this investment is as important for the health and security of the American people as any other that we make. So I'm going to be working with my friend, the chairwoman, to try and get the maximum number here, and certainly working with the administration, where I have some disagreements, as I've expressed in other areas, but we don't disagree here. And I'm very pleased to see the president actually, frankly, stepping up to Congress. My friend, the chair, and I have talked about this before. Congress has been the leader in this area for not a few years, but for generations. It's been Congress that's made these investments. I always tell people, I think it's because we're at town hall meetings and we interact more with people that tell us about their challenges in their family with cancer, or their challenges with Alzheimer's, or what they've seen a friend at church or at work or at their civic clubs go through in terms of chronic illness. And I think we feel that collectively, Republican and Democrat, very deeply. And I think that's why this committee has done what it's done over many, many years. And particularly, though, I'm proud of my association with you, Madam Chair, over what we've done in the last 6 years. So I would just say, number one, thank you for the hearing. It's always a great hearing. Much more importantly, thank you for your commitment in this area. It's well known and widely appreciated on both sides of the aisle. And I want to thank Dr. Collins and his associates at the NIH. We really appreciate the work that you and your colleagues do. We really appreciate not just the immediate science, but the thoughtfulness about what it takes to create an infrastructure of science, if you will, where we're attracting young researchers, where we're presenting people with the opportunities to good science. I think about what our good friend, Dr. Sharpless, said about cancer in particular. You know, it's a great thing to go from 8 to 11%, I guess, funding the proposals, but it's 11%. None of us should be excited about that. I can assure you, not every one of the proposals we didn't fund is good science, but a lot of them are. And we lose over 600,000 people a year, 650,000, I recall, to cancer. That's as much as COVID, you know. That's on an annual basis, and that's with a 65% recovery rate, which is something this committee in particular can be proud of what it's done, but we need to do more. So let me just end with this. What a great hearing. I want to thank all the members. You know, their participation was great on both sides of the aisle. I want to thank you, Madam Chairman, for holding it. I particularly want to thank Dr. Collins and his colleagues at the NIH. I think most Americans probably don't realize what an extraordinary thing we saw the last year. The idea that we could create in this country in less than a year multiple vaccines for a pandemic is an extraordinary achievement. NIH wasn't the only player in that, but they were the quarterback in the big game. And they were a major player all the way through. And I particularly appreciate Dr. Collins pointing out how the previous investments of this committee over multiple years and multiple iterations of who was in control have really made a difference for the American people. This is something, and we've talked about this many times, Madam Chair, where we need sustained annual above inflation increases. We've achieved that all 6 years you and I have worked together. Very much my hope we'll achieve that again as we go forward. I think it's really in the interest of the American people, and frankly, in this case, in the interest of all humanity, because the engine of the NIH does a lot more than just help us here in this country. I think the best thing we can do, diplomatically in terms of our geopolitical situation, is just help people around the world. It's a wise investment, whether it's foreign assistance, whether it's the science that's made available here. I do associate with myself with my friends who are worried about the decision to, willy-nilly give away intellectual property. I personally think that's a mistake. But I think the instinct behind helping people beyond our own borders is something that we should be proud of, and something, an asset for our country. So with that, Madam Chair, again, thank you for a great hearing. I'm sorry I won't be with you tomorrow, believe me, in multiple ways, but I appreciate very much, again, this hearing, not only this hearing, the sequence of hearings you've put together, they've been spectacular for this committee. And with that, I yield back to my friend.
Thank you very, very, very much. And I will miss you tomorrow. I will miss you. I thank you. I think you've, laid out both how we sustain what is happening, how we really, in fact, utilize this opportunity to build that architecture for the future that we need, because this is about the noble mission of saving lives. That's where we. That's where we, there isn't a greater goal or a mission of anything that we do at the federal level as what is really accomplished through the NIH. I do believe that Congresswoman Lawrence is still here, and she didn't get a chance. If you have a quick question or a quick comment, Congresswoman Lawrence, because we need to wrap up.
Yes, I wish that the system hadn't gone down. I just want to express this concern that I was so impressed at the response and all hands on deck when it came to fighting this virus. But as you've heard from multiple members, there is, for me, the impression that it's just business as usual with some very chronic diseases like cancer, hypertension, and other disease that we know is what they call the underlying conditions. Where is it? Is it more money needed? Is it the direction of leadership that we can keep this overall, Dr. Fauci? I mean, you led the way of not allowing any stone unturned. And I feel that our science and some of these critical disease, dementia, and others, we are not getting the same amount of a sense of urgency. Can you address that? Is it money? What is it that we need to do?
So let me take a first stab at that, but Tony may want to add. I think you put your finger on exactly the reason why we think at NIH there are two major things we need to push harder in this coming year, health disparities research being one, and mechanisms to be able to do that more aggressively, more nimbly, more in a different way of actually trying to achieve results. And that's where this ARPA-H model actually fits in. And I don't think I've said it until now, and I should have. ARPA-H also offers opportunities to pursue problems like the ones you're mentioning, the chronic illnesses, diabetes, hypertension that cause health disparities. And we would aim to use that engine for that purpose as well. I've had many ideas already brought to me about what we might be able to do with that mechanism that our traditional method of grant giving can't quite achieve at the same timetable. Tony, I don't know if you want to add something, because I think she addressed the question to you.
Well, Congressman Lawrence, it goes well beyond the NIH. So not to pass the buck to others, but I think it's important what you point out, that the COVID-19 pandemic has shown a bright light on these kinds of disparities, which are really due to literally decades long social determinants of health that start from birth. As you mentioned in a very articulate way in your presentation, from diets that are not available to people, to not getting your hypertension diagnosed when you're young, and to present when you have already the starts of hypertension and renal disease and heart disease. There are things that we can do at the NIH, but I hope that the rest of the world and the rest of the country specifically realizes that this is a decades-long commitment to remove those social determinants that are really part, as Dr. Collins said in his opening remarks, part of the racism that has existed in this country for such a long period of time.
Thank you. I just want to say that we need all hands on deck on this, and thank you for everything you've done with COVID. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. And let me just, I will wrap up, but I want to just say to my friend, the ranking member, Congressman Cole, I think about that, how blessed we are that we are serving in the United States House of Representatives, that we are part of an effort, and particularly with this subcommittee, where we have come together over the last several years and increased NIH funding by $12.9 billion, 42% over the last 6 years. We did it in a collaborative way, and it's not just to give lip service to being bipartisan, but it is genuinely understanding of the value of the research that is done at the NIH, and that we often think about, we are in these positions, and it is what you do with the position that you come to understand why you come to serve. And I know why Congressman Cole has come to serve, and that's to make the institution work for the benefit of people that he represents, but for the entire country. And yes, in this context, for humanity. So it's really an honor and a pleasure to be able to work with him on these issues, because there is such a commonality of purpose and a sense of a moral responsibility to be able to get these, to be able to get things done and to provide the resources that this committee has to be able to get these efforts underway and to fruition. I want to say a thank you. I would just say to you, Dr. Sharpless, I know that your sleepiness, you're staying up at night. I think it could be resolved and remedied by resources. So I think that that's what, I picked up during the course of your exchanges with our colleagues today. But to all of our witnesses here today, it's exhilarating. I don't know how best to say it. It is exhilarating. And my hope and yours is that we are together next year in person. I believe that we will. And one of the reasons why this is the most important hearing, in my view, that we have is because what we do is we learn of the discoveries to cure that you are engaged in and what you're doing. What is it that we learn what your future research will result in, what it can do. We know that the resources that we provide for a specific area can, in fact, lead to the discovery in so many other areas. And that is all with the goal of saving lives. And as I said a few moments ago, there isn't any more important mission. I always say, I represent, a state that deals with helicopters, we deal with roads, we deal with bridges, we deal with all kinds of issues, but nothing is more important than the content of what, as the subject matter of today's hearing. I will again repeat the tremendous success of COVID-19, the mRNA technology. Listen, this is the biomedical research that you have been working on. And you never know. You can tell us better than we can tell you because we're not scientists. You never know where the years of and the decades of basic research are going to take you, where the breakthroughs are going to be made. And in that context, I reiterate the importance of continuing to support sustained increases in funding for basic research at NIH. None of the successes that we've discussed today would be possible without that basic research. So, I'm excited about the administration's proposal to create ARPA-H. It's so promising. I have questions about how we avoid duplicating the efforts of existing NIH activities, how we balance investments with ARPA-H, investments in basic research, and how the NIH will make the decisions about what the research is that we pursue. And we want you to make those decisions. You know that this has been a subcommittee that has tried very, very hard not to earmark, if you will, areas of research. That's not our jurisdiction. It really isn't. That is yours. So excited about the proposals that we know are going forward, and those proposals that are going to look at the health disparities, which have been mentioned today, the maternal health issues, and so many other critical areas. So I thank the witnesses, not just being here today, but for the commitment that you made in your professional careers to focus on how we, in fact, yes, use your talent, your ability, use the NIH to save people's lives. Thank you. And with that, I bring this hearing to a close. Thank you.
Thank you.